Some generals chose war because of ambition, some because of duty. Walther von Reichenau chose war because of loyalty, not to his country, not to his soldiers, not to honour or tradition, but to Adolf Hitler. When other officers hesitated to tie their personal reputations to a man who shouted revolution from beer halls, Reichenau leaned in. When the German officer corps clung to its old pride, Reichenau discarded it. When men of the Wehrmacht still dreamed of a Germany rooted in military values rather than ideology, Reichenau embraced a new truth. Power belonged to whoever stood closest to Hitler. That loyalty elevated him faster than skill ever could. Walther von Reichenau came from the old Prussian world, aristocratic lineage, polished manners, cold discipline. He grew up surrounded by military prestige, dining with men who believed that the army was the backbone of the nation. But unlike many of his peers, Reichenau was not shackled to tradition. He sensed the shift happening in Germany long before Hitler seized power. He understood that a new future would be built not on strategy or logistics, but on political obedience. So while other generals scoffed at the Nazi movement, Reichenau befriended it. That one decision changed everything. He became one of Hitler's earliest military allies, a bridge between the old officer corps and the radical new movement rising beneath it. He vouched for Hitler, he defended him. He charmed industrialists and officers into believing the Nazis could restore Germany's power. Hitler never forgot that loyalty, and loyalty was rewarded. When war erupted, Reichenau was given command of Sixth Army, one of the most powerful field armies in the German war machine. In the invasion of Poland, his troops tore across the countryside, not just with military precision, but with ideological fury. Reichenau was not just a general implementing orders, he was a general shaping them. He demanded aggressive cooperation between the army and the SS. Many officers were uncomfortable. Reichenau pushed harder. Under his command, the lines separating the Wehrmacht from the Einsatzgruppen blurred. In 1941, during Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of the Soviet Union, Reichenau gave a speech that cut away the last thin veil between soldier and executioner. It became infamous. Historians later called it the Severity Order. In it, Reichenau told his soldiers that they were not fighting just an army, they were fighting Jewish Bolshevism. He ordered them to support the SS in cleansing actions. He encouraged brutality. He authorized the murder of civilians. Other Wehrmacht generals tried to pretend that the army was separate from the genocide. Reichenau erased that pretense. Wherever Sixth Army advanced, Einsatzgruppen followed. Wherever Einsatzgruppen executed, Sixth Army protected them. Sixth Army would later become infamous at Stalingrad under Paulus. But its ideological foundation, its merging of military and genocide, began with Reichenau. He was not a brilliant strategist. He was not a tactical genius. He was valuable because he was loyal. And that loyalty cost lives. Yet even those who admired Hitler eventually learned that loyalty flows only one direction. In 1942, Reichenau suffered a stroke. He was flown back to Germany for medical treatment. The plane crashed. Whether by accident, by weather, or by something darker, we will never truly know. Walther von Reichenau, Hitler's most loyal general, died not on the battlefield, but in transit, alone, as the war machine he helped build marched toward its own destruction. History does not celebrate him. History records him as a turning point, the moment when the German army stopped being just a military institution and became an accessory to genocide. Some generals shaped victory. Reichenau shaped complicity. Tonight we go back to those moments, to the meetings where loyalty mattered more than ethics, to the decrees that turned ideology into murder, to the instant when a general traded honour for power. This is the entire history of Walther von Reichenau, the general who proved that obedience without morality is the most dangerous force in the world. Before we begin, take a second and ground yourself in the present. Where are you right now as you listen? Are you lying in bed with the room dark and quiet, letting the story pull you away from the day? Or are you somewhere still awake, headphones on, listening while the world outside keeps moving? And what time is it where you are? Late night, early morning, or that strange hour where time feels slow and heavy? I like picturing you there, in that exact moment, sharing this journey into the past. And if these long, slow histories help you unwind, reflect, or drift towards sleep, consider subscribing. It shows me that someone on the other side values deep storytelling, and it keeps me inspired to create the next chapter for you. November 7th, 1932. A private dining room in Munich's Kaiserhof Hotel fills with cigarette smoke and nervous energy. At the center table sits a Prussian general's son, 48 years old. His posture militarily perfect. His eyes fixed on a man whose voice grows louder with each passing minute. Adolf Hitler paces as he speaks, his hands cutting through the air with violent gestures. Most of the uniformed officers in the room shift uncomfortably, exchanging glances that telegraph skepticism and barely concealed contempt. But Walther von Reichenau leans forward. He listens with an intensity that borders on hunger. When Hitler finishes speaking, Reichenau is the first to stand and applaud. In that moment, a choice is made that will reshape German military history and contribute to the deaths of millions. The aristocrat has chosen the swastika over the Prussian eagle. He will never look back. Understanding Walther von Reichenau requires understanding what he abandoned and what he embraced. Born in October 1884 in Karlsruhe, he entered a world of rigid military traditions stretching back centuries. His father was a Prussian general, his grandfather had served in the wars of German unification, and his family expected nothing less than a distinguished career in the Kaiser's army. Young Walther attended the most prestigious military academies, where instructors drilled into cadets the sacred virtues of the Prussian officer: honour, duty, apolitical loyalty to the state, and a carefully maintained distance from the vulgar world of political ideology. The officer corps saw itself as above politics, serving Germany itself rather than any particular government or party. This was the world Reichenau was born into, a world of tradition, aristocratic privilege, and unquestioned codes of conduct. It was also a world he would ultimately betray with calculated precision. The First World War transformed Reichenau from promising officer to seasoned combat veteran. He served on both the Western and Eastern fronts, earning the Iron Cross First Class for bravery under fire. He witnessed the brutal stalemate of trench warfare, where millions died for gains measured in meters. He experienced the coordination of artillery, infantry, and the new technologies of modern war, learning lessons about combined arms tactics that would later prove invaluable. But more importantly, he experienced defeat. When Germany collapsed in November 1918, Reichenau was among the generation of officers who refused to accept that their army had been militarily beaten. Instead, they embraced the stab-in-the-back legend, the poisonous myth that Germany had been betrayed by socialists, communists, and Jews on the home front, while the army remained undefeated in the field. This lie became the foundation of Reichenau's political worldview. Unlike older officers, who saw the Versailles Treaty as humiliating but concluded that Germany must accept reality and rebuild slowly, Reichenau seethed with revanchist fury. The Weimar Republic, years 1919 to 1933, saw Reichenau rise through the ranks of the drastically reduced Reichswehr, the 100,000-man army permitted under Versailles limitations. He served in various staff positions, gaining expertise in military planning and organisation. But these were frustrating years for ambitious officers. The Treaty of Versailles had stripped Germany of its air force, limited its navy to coastal defence vessels, prohibited tanks and heavy artillery, and reduced the proud German military to a skeleton force. Reichenau watched as France maintained an army of over 400,000 men, while Germany was held to a fraction of that strength. He observed the chaos of the Weimar political system, with its fractured parties, coalition governments that fell apart within months, and the humiliation of French occupation of the Rhineland when Germany fell behind on reparations payments. Where traditional Prussian officers viewed this turmoil with aristocratic disdain for all politics, Reichenau began to see politics as the tool for military revival. He was not content to wait. He was searching for a political force that could tear up the Versailles Treaty and restore German military power. By 1932, Reichenau held the position of Chief of Staff to General Erich von Reichenau in the Reichswehr's East Prussian Command. This posting placed him in the perfect position to become a bridge between the military establishment and the rising Nazi Party. While most senior officers viewed Hitler as a useful demagogue who might be controlled and exploited, Reichenau recognized something different. He saw in National Socialism not merely a political tool but a revolutionary ideology that matched his own worldview. Hitler promised to destroy the Versailles system entirely, to rearm Germany without limit, to reclaim lost territories, and to settle scores with France and the supposed internal enemies who had stabbed Germany in the back. More than this, Hitler offered a vision of total war, of struggle as the fundamental condition of existence, of military strength as the measure of national virtue. For Reichenau, this was not rhetoric to be tolerated, but truth to be embraced. His colleagues whispered behind his back that he had become a Nazi in uniform. They meant it as an insult. Reichenau took it as a compliment. The meeting in Munich that November was not Reichenau's first contact with Hitler, but it was the moment when he committed himself fully to the Nazi cause. Hitler was weeks away from being appointed Chancellor through backroom political maneuvering by conservative politicians who believed they could control him. Reichenau positioned himself as the crucial military link in this scheme. He worked behind the scenes to reassure nervous army commanders that Hitler could be trusted, that the Nazis would massively expand the military and restore Germany's great power status. When General Kurt von Schleicher, the last chancellor before Hitler, tried to split the Nazi party and outmaneuver Hitler politically, Reichenau actively undermined him. This was extraordinary behavior for a Reichswehr officer. The German military was supposed to remain above partisan politics, serving the state regardless of which parties formed the government. But Reichenau had abandoned that tradition. He had chosen sides. On January 30th, 1933, Hitler became Chancellor of Germany. Within weeks, Reichenau was working directly with the Nazi leadership to plan the military's expansion. June 30th, 1934, the night of the long knives. Hitler moves against Ernst Röhm and the leadership of the SA, the Nazi Party's brown-shirt paramilitary force that numbers over 3 million men. Röhm has been demanding that the SA absorb the Reichswehr and become Germany's true revolutionary army, with himself as its commander. This directly threatens the regular military's existence and prestige. When Hitler decides to purge the SA leadership in a weekend of extrajudicial executions, he needs the army's support. Reichenau provides it. He coordinates with SS leaders to ensure the military will not interfere with the killings. He helps arrange for army barracks to serve as detention and execution sites for SA leaders. Over the weekend, approximately 85 people are murdered, including Röhm, other SA commanders, and various political enemies. Hitler uses the purge to eliminate. 2 former chancellors are killed. General von Schleicher, Reichenau's former superior who had opposed Hitler, is shot dead in his home along with his wife. The message is clear. Hitler will kill anyone, including military officers, who stand in his way. The army's reward for its complicity is Hitler's promise that it will remain Germany's sole armed force. Reichenau's reward is Hitler's permanent trust. While other generals maintained a careful public distance from Nazi ideology, Reichenau displayed his political allegiance with almost theatrical enthusiasm. He filled his office with Nazi regalia, replacing the traditional Prussian symbols that other officers cherished. At social functions and official ceremonies, he gave the Hitler salute with stiff-armed precision, while colleagues offered perfunctory nods. His wedding reception became legendary among the officer corps, not for its elegance but for its political character. Reichenau ensured that Nazi Party officials outnumbered traditional military guests. He displayed swastika banners prominently. When some older officers grumbled about the mixture of politics and military tradition, Reichenau made his position clear. The old traditions had led to defeat in 1918, and only National Socialist ideology could restore Germany's greatness. He was not embarrassed by his political enthusiasm. He was proud of it. In an officer corps where political neutrality had been sacred doctrine, Reichenau became the most prominently political general in Germany. This was not mere careerism or opportunistic loyalty to whoever held power. Reichenau's private letters and diary entries, later examined by historians, revealed genuine ideological conviction. He believed in racial hierarchy, in the necessity of eliminating Jewish influence from German life, in Germany's right to dominate Europe through military conquest. He shared Hitler's contempt for democracy, for international law, for the entire system of European peace that had emerged from Versailles. Where some Wehrmacht generals later claimed they had simply followed orders from legitimate authority, Reichenau anticipated and enthusiastically supported the most radical Nazi policies. He did not need to be ordered to persecute Jews or to wage war of annihilation. He volunteered for these missions. His National Socialist conviction was not a uniform he put on for Hitler's benefit, but a worldview he had internalized completely. In the officer corps, where anti-Semitism was common but usually expressed through social discrimination and career obstacles rather than violence, Reichenau embraced the Nazi vision of total elimination. By the mid-1930s, Reichenau had become indispensable to Hitler's plans for Germany. He was the bridge between the old Prussian military elite and the new Nazi order, the general who could translate Hitler's aggressive visions into concrete military planning. Other officers might be more brilliant tacticians or more experienced commanders, but none combined military competence with ideological reliability as completely as Reichenau. Hitler trusted him in ways he trusted few other Wehrmacht officers. The Führer knew that Reichenau would not merely obey orders, but would anticipate what the regime wanted and implement it with enthusiasm. This made Reichenau extraordinarily dangerous. A competent general is a valuable military asset. A competent general who is also a true believer in a genocidal ideology becomes an instrument of mass death. As Germany rearmed and prepared for the wars that Hitler had always intended to wage, Reichenau stood ready to serve. The aristocrat had long since abandoned the codes of his caste. He had become something new, the Nazi general. A fusion of Prussian military efficiency with totalitarian ideology. The world would soon learn what such men could accomplish when given armies to command. October 1st, 1933. A small office in Berlin's Bendlerblock, the nondescript stone building housing Wehrmacht High Command, becomes the nerve centre of Germany's secret rearmament. Walther von Reichenau, newly appointed head of the Wehrmacht office, spreads maps across his desk showing Germany's current military impotence and its potential future strength. The Treaty of Versailles permits Germany an army of 100,000 men with no tanks, no military aircraft, no heavy artillery, and no general staff for planning offensive operations. Reichenau's job is to systematically violate every one of these restrictions while avoiding immediate French military intervention. He works 18-hour days, coordinating with industrial planners, training officers, and Nazi Party officials to build the military machine that Hitler will need for conquest. His staff expands from 150 personnel to 900 within 2 years. Every day brings new plans for divisions that do not yet exist, for weapons factories hidden behind civilian industrial covers, for the transformation of Germany from defeated power to military juggernaut. Reichenau attacks this mission with the fervour of a true believer building a cathedral. His cathedral will be made of tanks and warplanes. The scale of what Reichenau coordinates is staggering in its ambition and its illegality. The Versailles Treaty had been designed specifically to prevent Germany from ever again threatening European peace through military force. The 100,000-man Reichswehr was intended as a defensive force, capable of maintaining internal order but unable to conduct offensive operations against Germany's neighbours. Tank production was absolutely forbidden, military aircraft were completely prohibited, the General Staff, which had coordinated Germany's massive military operations in World War I, was outlawed. Even the Rhine River's western bank was to remain permanently demilitarized, creating a buffer zone that would give France warning of any German attack. These restrictions had been negotiated at Versailles and were backed by the threat of Allied military force if Germany violated them. For 15 years, Germany had chafed under these limits but had largely complied. Within months of Hitler taking power, with Reichenau as his primary military coordinator, Germany begins systematically dismantling every single restriction. Reichenau's first priority is creating the organizational structure for a much larger army. The Versailles Treaty forbids a general staff, so Reichenau rebuilds it under the innocuous name Truppenamt, the troop office, supposedly a simple administrative department. He fills it with the most talented officers from the old Reichswehr, men who spent the Weimar years studying military theory and waiting for their chance to apply it. Together, they draft plans for expanding from 7 infantry divisions to 36 divisions within 3 years. They design organizational structures for panzer divisions that do not yet exist. They plan logistics networks for an army of millions supplied by an industrial base that is only beginning to reorient toward weapons production. Every plan is created in duplicate. One version uses careful language implying defensive purposes suitable for showing to foreign military, attachés or nervous conservative politicians. Another version uses frank language about offensive operations and aggressive war. Reichenau personally reviews both versions. He knows exactly what they are building and why. The cooperation between Reichenau's Wehrmacht office and Hermann Göring's rapidly expanding Luftwaffe illustrates the scope of Germany's rearmament conspiracy. The Versailles Treaty completely forbids German military aviation. The Allies understood that aircraft had been crucial to World War I operations and that any future German military threat would require air power. But throughout the 1920s, Germany had maintained a civilian aviation industry, training pilots, ostensibly for commercial purposes through glider clubs and sport flying organizations. When Hitler takes power, Göring, himself a decorated World War I fighter ace, becomes Reich Minister of Aviation. Under Reichenau's coordination, the facade drops, civilian aircraft factories retool for military production. Sport pilots receive military training. Commercial airports are surveyed for conversion to military air bases. By 1935, Germany possesses approximately 2,500 military aircraft, an air force created from nothing in under 3 years. Reichenau's office coordinates Wehrmacht ground operations with Luftwaffe air support, developing the combined arms doctrine that will later devastate Poland and France. Reichenau faces a fundamental challenge. Germany's industrial capacity in 1933 cannot support a modern military force of the size Hitler demands. German steel production is insufficient for both civilian needs and massive weapons manufacturing. Germany lacks domestic sources of critical materials like rubber for tires and high-octane fuel for aircraft. The country's machine tool industry, though highly skilled, is oriented toward precision manufacturing rather than the mass production required for weapons. Reichenau addresses these problems through a combination of economic planning and technological innovation that blurs the line between military preparation and total economic mobilization. He coordinates with IG Farben, Germany's largest chemical conglomerate, to develop synthetic rubber and synthetic fuel production from coal. He works with industrial planners to prioritize scarce resources for military production. He personally meets with major industrialists, explaining that their cooperation now will be rewarded with contracts worth billions of Reichsmarks. Some businessmen express concerns about international reaction or the destabilizing economic effects of such rapid militarization. Reichenau is not interested in their concerns. March 16, 1935. Hitler publicly announces the reintroduction of military conscription and the creation of a peacetime army of 36 divisions, approximately 550,000 men. This direct violation of the Versailles Treaty represents an enormous gamble. If France and Britain decide to enforce the treaty through military action, Germany is still incapable of defending itself against a serious Allied attack. The new Wehrmacht divisions exist mostly on paper. Weapons are still being produced. Training is incomplete. But Hitler is gambling that the Allies will protest diplomatically rather than act militarily, and Reichenau has given him the confidence to make this gamble. Behind the scenes, Reichenau has prepared detailed reports showing that while Germany cannot yet win a major war, it could inflict serious casualties on any French occupation force, making military intervention politically costly for France's democratic government. He is correct. Britain and France issue strongly worded protests. The League of Nations condemns Germany. No Allied soldiers cross the Rhine. The Versailles system has been breached, and Germany's military expansion continues unopposed. The following year brings an even more significant test. March 7, 1936. German military units cross the bridges into the Rhineland, remilitarizing the zone that Versailles had declared must remain forever free of German forces. This is the most dangerous gamble yet. France has the military power to crush the German units, which are under orders to retreat immediately if France responds with force. German commanders are nervous. Some senior officers have warned Hitler that France will fight and that Germany will face humiliation or worse. But Reichenau has reassured Hitler that France will not act. He bases this assessment on intelligence about French domestic politics, on the French military's defensive doctrine, and on his judgment that democracies lack the will to use force preemptively. German troops march across the Rhine bridges. France mobilizes but does not attack. Britain urges restraint. The Rhineland remilitarization succeeds without a shot fired. Hitler's confidence in Reichenau's judgment grows stronger. The balance of power in Europe has shifted fundamentally, and Reichenau's planning has made it possible. Behind the public drama of treaty violations and diplomatic crises, Reichenau coordinates aspects of German rearmament that operate in deeper secrecy. Throughout the late 1920s and early 1930s, Germany had maintained covert military cooperation with the Soviet Union, despite the ideological hostility between the two systems. At secret bases inside the Soviet Union, German officers trained with prohibited weapons. At Lipetsk, German pilots learned to fly military aircraft. At Kazan, German officers commanded tanks. At Tomka, chemical weapons were tested and stockpiled. These programs were supposed to be discontinued when Hitler took power, given Nazi ideology's violent anti-communism. But Reichenau ensures they continue until Germany can replace Soviet training facilities with domestic ones. He understands that ideology is important, but trained tank commanders and combat pilots are more important. Only when German facilities are ready does he recommend ending the Soviet cooperation. By then, Germany has gained the trained cadre necessary to build a modern armoured force. By 1938, Reichenau's work has transformed Germany's military position beyond recognition. The 100,000-man Reichswehr has become a Wehrmacht of nearly 900,000 men in peacetime, expandable to several million through mobilization. Germany possesses thousands of tanks, organized into panzer divisions, trained in the mobile warfare doctrine that will become famous as Blitzkrieg. The Luftwaffe is one of the world's most powerful air forces. German industry produces weapons at a rate that alarms foreign observers. The General Staff exists again, able to coordinate multi-front operations involving millions of men. All of this has been accomplished in under 5 years, a pace of military expansion unprecedented in peacetime. Reichenau has not done this alone, obviously. Thousands of officers, industrialists, engineers, and Nazi Party officials have contributed. But Reichenau has been the coordinator, the translator of Hitler's aggressive visions into concrete military capabilities. His reward is promotion and command of one of the new field armies. His real achievement is darker. He has given Hitler the tools for aggressive war. The moral implications of Reichenau's work in these years are profound and cannot be evaded. He is not simply following orders from legitimate authority. He is actively creating the military machine that will be used for wars of aggression, for the conquest of neighbouring countries, and ultimately for genocide. He knows this. His own writings and statements from this period make clear that he understands Germany is preparing for war, not defence. He coordinates planning for offensive operations. He reviews war games that simulate invasions of Poland and Czechoslovakia. He works with SS leaders to discuss security operations in occupied territories. When conservative officers express concerns about the speed of rearmament or the risks of Hitler's aggressive foreign policy, Reichenau dismisses them as defeatist. He is not troubled by moral doubts. He believes in Germany's right to dominate Europe through military force. He believes in the Nazi ideology that justifies this domination. He is not a technician neutrally executing orders, but a true believer building the instrument of his ideology. By 1938, that instrument is almost ready to be used. All it requires is Hitler's decision to strike. March 12, 1938. Dawn breaks over the Austrian border near Salzburg. Walther von Reichenau, commanding the Wehrmacht's 7th Corps, watches as his units cross into Austria unopposed. The tanks and trucks roll past border posts where Austrian guards stand aside or actively cheer in villages along the invasion route. Civilians emerge to strew flowers in the paths of German vehicles and raise their arms in Nazi salutes. Church bells ring. By afternoon, Reichenau's forces are advancing toward Linz, Hitler's childhood city, where massive crowds are gathering to greet the Führer. There is no resistance. Austrian Chancellor Kurt Schuschnigg has resigned under overwhelming Nazi pressure. The Austrian army has been ordered not to resist. What is called the Anschluss, the union of Germany and Austria, proceeds like a military parade rather than an invasion. To the rest of Europe, this looks like a bloodless political merger, perhaps regrettable but not worth war. For Reichenau, this is something far more significant. Proof that overwhelming military force can achieve political goals without actual combat, and proof that neither France nor Britain will fight to stop German expansion. The Austrian operation has been planned for months, but the timeline accelerates dramatically in early March when Austrian Chancellor Schuschnigg announces a referendum on Austrian independence. Hitler cannot allow Austrians to vote to remain independent. If the referendum succeeds, it will be a humiliating defeat for Nazi ideology's claim that all ethnic Germans wish to unite in a single Reich. If the referendum fails, the world will see that even Austrians reject Hitler. Either outcome is unacceptable. Hitler orders the Wehrmacht to prepare for immediate invasion. Reichenau's 7th Corps receives movement orders on March 10th. They have 48 hours to move into assault positions along the Austrian border. This is an enormous logistical challenge. Thousands of vehicles must be fueled, supplied, and positioned. Routes must be cleared. Bridges must be verified, capable of supporting tank weights. But Reichenau's corps accomplishes it. The speed and efficiency of the mobilization itself becomes a form of psychological warfare. Austrian military intelligence reports massive German forces massing at the border, and the Austrian government concludes resistance is hopeless. Reichenau's advance into Austria reveals both the strengths and weaknesses of the rapidly expanded Wehrmacht. The strengths are obvious. German units move with impressive speed and coordination, demonstrating that Reichenau's years of planning and training have created an effective military machine. Officers understand combined arms operations. Soldiers are well trained and motivated. Equipment is modern and, mostly, functional. But the weaknesses emerge too. Approximately 70% of German vehicles break down during the relatively short advance to Vienna. Fuel shortages develop because supply units cannot keep pace with advancing combat formations. Traffic jams clog Austrian roads as different German units interfere with each other's movements. In a real war against determined resistance, these logistical failures could prove catastrophic. But in Austria, they do not matter. There is no resistance. The German columns advance through cheering crowds, and broken-down tanks are towed to repair facilities without ever facing enemy fire. Hitler enters Vienna on March 15th, standing in an open car and receiving delirious applause from hundreds of thousands of Austrians. Reichenau is present for the triumphal entry, commanding the military security arrangements. He ensures Wehrmacht units are positioned throughout the city to maintain order and to make Germany's military power visible. That evening, Hitler speaks from the balcony of Vienna's Imperial Hotel to a crowd estimated at 200,000 people. He declares that Austria has returned to the German Reich after nearly a century of separation. The crowd roars approval. Behind the scenes, less publicized events are already unfolding. SS units have followed the Wehrmacht into Austria, carrying lists of political opponents, Jews, and other targets for arrest. Within days, approximately 70,000 people are imprisoned. Vienna's Jewish population of 200,000 faces immediate persecution. Jewish shops are vandalized, Jewish professionals are expelled from their positions, and thousands of Jews attempt to flee Austria before the borders close. Reichenau's Wehrmacht provides logistical support to the SS operations, offering transport and coordination. When some Wehrmacht officers question whether the military should support political arrests, Reichenau makes the Wehrmacht's position clear. The SS operations are necessary security measures, and the Wehrmacht will cooperate fully. September 1938. The Sudetenland crisis brings Europe to the brink of war. The Sudetenland, the mountainous borderland of Czechoslovakia, is home to approximately 3 million ethnic Germans. Hitler demands that this territory be transferred to Germany, and he makes clear that Germany will go to war to achieve this if necessary. Unlike Austria, Czechoslovakia is a genuine military power. The Czech army numbers 400,000 men with modern equipment and strong defensive fortifications in the Sudetenland mountains. More critically, Czechoslovakia has alliance treaties with France and the Soviet Union. If Germany attacks Czechoslovakia, it might trigger a major European war that Germany is not yet prepared to win. But Hitler is willing to gamble, and Reichenau is among the generals urging him forward. Throughout September, Reichenau positions Wehrmacht units along the Czech border in obvious preparation for invasion. The message is clear. Germany will attack unless its demands are met. The Munich Conference of September 29, 1938, averts war through appeasement. British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain and French Premier Édouard Daladier agree to Hitler's demands. The Sudetenland will be transferred to Germany without war. Czechoslovakia is not invited to the conference where its territory is given away. The Czechs are simply informed that Britain and France will not fight for them. On October 1st, German forces, including Reichenau's units, march into the Sudetenland, unopposed. Again, there is no fighting. Again, the Wehrmacht advances past cheering ethnic German crowds waving swastika flags. Again, the tanks roll forward without encountering resistance. For Reichenau, this is an even more significant lesson than Austria. Czechoslovakia was a real military power, yet the mere threat of German force has been enough to achieve complete victory without war. The Wehrmacht's credibility as a fighting force is growing through operations where it never has to fight. March 15, 1939. Germany completes the destruction of Czechoslovakia. Hitler summons Czech President Emil Hácha to Berlin and, through threats of immediate aerial bombardment of Prague, forces him to sign a document placing Czech territory under German protection. The following morning, German forces occupy the remainder of Czechoslovakia. Reichenau's units enter Prague, the Czech capital, and establish military control. This operation differs from Austria and the Sudetenland in a crucial way. It cannot be justified even by the pretense of uniting ethnic Germans. The Czechs are a Slavic people, and their territory has never been part of Germany. This is naked conquest, the extinction of an internationally recognized state through military intimidation. Even Britain and France, which had appeased Hitler throughout the Sudetenland crisis, recognized that Hitler's promises about his limited territorial ambitions were lies. The international mood shifts. Guarantees are issued to Poland and Romania. It is becoming clear that further German expansion will mean war. For Reichenau, the bloodless conquests of 1938 and early 1939 represent professional triumphs. He has commanded large-scale military operations across international borders. His units have performed well in challenging logistical situations. He has demonstrated skill in coordinating military movements with political objectives. His reward is promotion to Colonel General Generaloberst, one of the highest ranks in the Wehrmacht. At 54 years old, he has reached the peak of military rank through a combination of political loyalty to Hitler and genuine military competence. Other generals might be more intellectually brilliant or more experienced in actual combat, but none can match Reichenau's combination of tactical skill and ideological reliability. Hitler trusts him completely. He is given command of 10th Army, one of the Wehrmacht's premier field armies, and he begins preparing for operations that will be very different from the unopposed advances into Austria and Czechoslovakia. Yet the bloodless conquests contain a dangerous lesson that Reichenau and Hitler internalize: that overwhelming military force can paralyze potential opponents, that democracies will not fight to stop German expansion, and that the risks of aggressive war are manageable. This is a fundamental misreading of the strategic situation. Austria and Czechoslovakia were small states that could not defend themselves alone and whose allies proved unwilling to fight for them. Poland will be different. Poland is a large country with a substantial army, and Britain and France have issued explicit guarantees to defend Polish independence. But Reichenau is convinced by the pattern of easy victories that German military superiority and Allied reluctance to fight make further expansion feasible. He communicates this confidence to Hitler. In the spring of 1939, planning begins for the invasion of Poland. Operation Fall Weiss, Case White. This time, there will be fighting. The moral trajectory of Reichenau's career in these years is revealing. He has participated in the destruction of two independent countries, Austria and Czechoslovakia, through military intimidation and conquest. He has provided logistical support to SS operations that resulted in tens of thousands of arrests and the beginning of systematic persecution of Jewish populations in annexed territories. He has helped prove that aggressive war can succeed if executed with sufficient ruthlessness and if the target is unable to defend itself effectively. None of this troubles his conscience. His writings from this period express satisfaction with German accomplishments and confidence about future operations. He describes the Anschluss as a liberation of Austria and the destruction of Czechoslovakia as necessary for German security. He does not question whether Germany has the right to conquer its neighbours. He assumes German superiority gives Germany that right. By the summer of 1939, Walther von Reichenau is not merely a general following orders. He is an enthusiastic architect of aggressive war, eagerly preparing for the largest military operation yet. April 3rd, 1939. 39. The Chancellery in Berlin, a massive new building designed by Albert Speer to intimidate visitors with its oppressive scale. Adolf Hitler convenes a secret meeting with his senior military commanders. Maps of Poland cover the conference table. Hitler speaks without the theatrical passion of his public speeches, laying out his decision in cold, clear terms. Germany will invade Poland before the end of summer, regardless of whether Britain and France declare war. This is not a contingency plan or a diplomatic bluff. This is a definitive order to prepare for a war that Hitler has decided to wage. Most of the generals in the room understand that this means European war, possibly World War. Britain and France have guaranteed Polish independence. Unlike Austria or Czechoslovakia, Poland has major allies who have explicitly promised to fight. Walther von Reichenau, commanding 10th Army, listens to the Führer's directive and accepts it without reservation. He will spend the next 4 months translating Hitler's decision into operational reality. The military situation facing Germany in spring 1939 is complex and genuinely dangerous. Poland is not a small country that can be casually intimidated. With a population of 35 million, Poland fields an army of approximately 1 million men in wartime mobilization. The Polish military is reasonably well equipped with French-supplied artillery and tanks. Polish soldiers are known for their fighting spirit, demonstrated in their successful defense of Warsaw against Soviet forces in 1920. Poland's strategic position is strong. Any German invasion must cross either heavily fortified border regions or the Danzig corridor, a narrow strip of territory separating East Prussia from the rest of Germany. Most dangerously, Poland has alliance treaties with Britain and France. If Germany invades Poland, Britain and France are treaty-bound to declare war on Germany. The Wehrmacht might defeat Poland, but can it then survive a two-front war against the Western Allies? Some senior German generals, including Chief of Staff Franz Halder, doubt it. They present Hitler with analyses suggesting that Germany needs several more years of rearmament before risking general war. Reichenau disagrees with the cautious generals. Throughout April and May, he argues forcefully in military planning sessions that Germany can achieve rapid victory in Poland before Britain and France can meaningfully intervene. His argument rests on several assumptions. First, that the Wehrmacht's superiority in tanks, aircraft, and operational doctrine will allow German forces to destroy the Polish army in a matter of weeks. Second, that Polish mobilization will be slow, allowing Germany to catch substantial Polish forces before they reach full strength. Third, that the Western Allies will be slow to attack Germany even after declaring war, giving Germany time to defeat Poland and then shift forces westward. These assumptions are not unreasonable given the intelligence available, but they are optimistic. Reichenau is gambling that German military superiority will prove so overwhelming that strategic risks can be ignored. He is also gambling that Britain and France lack the will to wage aggressive war on Germany's behalf. At his 10th Army headquarters in Oppeln, Silesia, Reichenau and his staff transform Hitler's general directive into detailed operational plans. 10th Army will be the main southern striking force, positioned to drive from Silesia directly toward Warsaw. The operational concept is encirclement on a massive scale. Army Group South, including 10th Army, will attack from the south and southwest, while Army Group North attacks from Pomerania and East Prussia. The two army groups will link up east of Warsaw, trapping the bulk of the Polish army in a giant pocket between German pincers. To accomplish this, 10th Army will need overwhelming force, 11 divisions, including 3 panzer divisions and 2 motorized infantry divisions, approximately 250,000 men supported by 800 tanks. Reichenau's staff officers spend countless hours planning routes of advance, supply lines, artillery support, air coordination with the Luftwaffe, and engineer operations to seize bridges across Polish rivers before they can be destroyed. The scale of coordination required for case-wide exceeds anything the Wehrmacht has attempted. 3,000 tanks must be positioned along the Polish border without revealing the exact timing of attack. 1.6 million men must be mobilized and moved into assault positions. Thousands of trains must transport equipment and supplies to forward depots. The Luftwaffe must coordinate strikes on Polish airfields, communication centres, and troop concentrations to coincide precisely with the ground invasion. Intelligence networks must provide current information on Polish deployments and fortifications. This is a vastly more complex operation than the unopposed marches into Austria and Czechoslovakia. One significant mistake in timing or coordination could allow the Polish army to complete its mobilization and establish strong defensive positions. Reichenau drives his staff mercilessly to perfect every detail. He personally reviews the plans of subordinate corps and division commanders, demanding corrections when he identifies weaknesses. Spring becomes summer, and the diplomatic situation remains volatile. Hitler demands that Poland cede the free city of Danzig and agree to a German-controlled corridor across the Polish corridor. Poland refuses, backed by British and French guarantees. Throughout Europe, war feels imminent, yet the exact timing remains uncertain. Reichenau's 10th Army continues preparations under the guise of military exercises. Troops are told they are participating in summer maneuvers. Equipment is moved to assembly areas, gradually to avoid alarming foreign intelligence services. But the scale of German movements cannot be entirely concealed. Polish intelligence reports massive German buildup along the border. Western newspapers speculate about imminent war. The British government begins evacuation planning for London. Yet still no one knows exactly when or if Hitler will give the final order. August 23rd, 1939. News reaches Reichenau's headquarters that sends shockwaves through the officer corps. Germany and the Soviet Union have signed a non-aggression pact, the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. This is stunning because Nazi ideology has always portrayed Bolshevism as Germany's mortal enemy. Hitler has spent years denouncing the Soviet Union and international communism. Now, Germany and the USSR have agreed not to attack each other. More significantly for military planning, the pact includes secret protocols dividing Eastern Europe into German and Soviet spheres of influence. Poland will be partitioned between Germany and the Soviet Union. This changes the strategic situation fundamentally. Reichenau and his staff realize immediately what this means. Poland will face invasion from both west and east simultaneously, and the Polish government will have no option to retreat eastward and continue resistance. The Soviet treaty removes the last major obstacle to German invasion. Within days, Hitler sets the invasion date, the night of August 31st, 1939. Reichenau's 10th Army headquarters operates under blackout conditions. Staff officers work by dim lights, finalizing the last details of plans that have been months in preparation. Division commanders receive sealed orders to be opened at 0300 hours the following morning. Artillery batteries are positioned just behind the frontier, shells stacked and ready. Tank crews sleep beside their panzers, having conducted final maintenance checks. Infantry units occupy forward positions in darkness, waiting for the signal to advance. At midnight, Reichenau briefs his corps commanders one final time. He emphasizes speed above all else. The invasion must penetrate deep into Poland in the first days, disrupting Polish mobilization and preventing the establishment of coherent defensive lines. He stresses ruthlessness. This will not be a gentlemanly war between professional armies. The SS Einsatzgruppen will follow the army into Poland, and the Wehrmacht will cooperate with their security operations. Questions are not encouraged. Reichenau's written orders to his subordinate commanders from these final hours reveal his mindset. The language emphasizes not only military objectives, but ideological purpose. His troops are not simply invading a neighboring country. They are fighting a racial enemy. Poland is described as a temporary creation of the Versailles Treaty, an artificial state occupying historically German territory. The Polish population is characterized in terms that dehumanize them and justify whatever brutality might be necessary. These orders go beyond standard military directives focused on tactical objectives and logistics. They frame the coming invasion in explicitly Nazi ideological terms. Reichenau is not simply a general executing orders from civilian leadership. He is translating Nazi ideology into military action, ensuring that the Wehrmacht's operations will align with the regime's criminal goals. As dawn approaches on September 1st, Reichenau positions himself at a forward observation post where he can witness the opening of the attack. Around him, officers check watches and wait for 0445, the scheduled time for the artillery bombardment to begin. There is a quality of nervous energy in the headquarters. This is different from Austria or Czechoslovakia. This time, there will be fighting. The Polish army will resist. German casualties will mount. And Britain and France will almost certainly declare war, though what that will mean in practical terms remains unclear. But Reichenau has committed himself to this path. He believes in Germany's military superiority, he believes in Hitler's judgment, he believes in the necessity of destroying Poland to create living space for German expansion. He has spent months planning this operation, and now the moment has arrived. The artillery opens fire precisely on schedule, and the invasion begins. The moral weight of what Reichenau is initiating cannot be overstated. This is aggressive war, the supreme crime under international law, from which all other war crimes flow. Germany has no defensive justification for invading Poland. Hitler's demands on Poland were deliberately designed to be unacceptable, creating a pretext for war. Reichenau knows this. He has been present at planning sessions where the real objectives were discussed openly. The destruction of Poland as an independent state, the seizure of Polish territory for German settlement, the elimination of Polish elites, and ultimately the enslavement or elimination of the Polish population. This is not war for limited political objectives that might be achieved through diplomacy. This is war for conquest and demographic transformation. Reichenau has planned his army's role in this criminal enterprise with meticulous care. In a few hours, his tanks will cross the border and German soldiers will begin killing Polish soldiers and civilians. The invasion of Poland will trigger World War II, the most destructive conflict in human history. Walther von Reichenau, the aristocrat who chose the swastika, is one of the key architects of this catastrophe, and he is proud of his work. September 1st, 1939, 4:45 in the morning. Along a 175-kilometre front in Silesia, Walther von Reichenau's artillery opens fire. Thousands of guns roar simultaneously, their shells arcing through the pre-dawn darkness toward Polish frontier positions. The bombardment continues for 45 minutes, a calculated storm of high explosive and steel designed to paralyze Polish defences before German infantry even begins to advance. At 05:30, the bombardment shifts to deeper targets, and German troops cross the border. Within minutes, Luftwaffe bombers appear over Polish airfields, railways, and communications centres. The coordination is nearly perfect. This is Blitzkrieg, lightning war, the operational doctrine that combines massed armour, motorised infantry, close air support, and aggressive exploitation of breakthroughs to shatter enemy forces before they can establish coherent defence. Poland is about to experience warfare at a tempo and intensity that military planners of previous generations would have considered impossible. Reichenau's 10th Army strikes toward the north and northeast, aiming to penetrate deep into Poland and wheel eastward toward Warsaw. The operational plan calls for speed above all else. Panzer divisions must reach and cross the Water River within 3 days, outrunning Polish attempts to establish defensive lines. Motorised infantry will follow immediately behind the panzers, preventing Polish forces from counterattacking the flanks of German penetrations. Regular infantry divisions will follow more slowly, securing captured territory and reducing any Polish strongpoints that the mobile forces bypass. It is a complex orchestration requiring precise timing and aggressive leadership at every level. Reichenau has trained his commanders for this mission. Now they must execute under combat conditions for the first time. The first days validate Reichenau's planning while revealing the brutal reality of mechanized warfare. German panzer divisions smash through Polish frontier defences with shocking ease. The combination of air bombardment, artillery support, and concentrated armour proves overwhelming. Polish units equipped with rifles and machine guns, expecting traditional infantry combat, suddenly face swarms of tanks supported by dive bombers. Polish anti-tank guns are too few and too light to stop German panzer advances. Communication lines are cut by bombing, preventing Polish commanders from coordinating effective responses. By September 3rd, advance elements of 10th Army have penetrated over 60 kilometres into Polish territory. Behind them lies chaos, destroyed Polish units, refugees fleeing the combat zones, and burning villages. The speed of the German advance is unprecedented, but the cost in destruction is enormous. September 4th through 6th, Battle of Piotrków. Polish forces of the Łódź Army attempt to establish a defensive line south of the city of Piotrków Trybunalski, hoping to block 10th Army's advance toward Warsaw. This is one of the first major set-piece battles of the campaign. pitting concentrated Polish infantry and artillery against Reichenau's combined arms forces. The result is catastrophic for Poland. German reconnaissance aircraft identify Polish positions. Luftwaffe bombers strike Polish artillery and reserve positions. Panzer divisions attack from multiple directions simultaneously, their tanks operating in coordination with infantry and combat engineers. Polish soldiers fight with desperate courage, some units holding positions until they are nearly annihilated. But courage cannot overcome the massive German advantage in mobility, firepower, and coordination. By September 6th, Polish resistance at Piotrków collapses. Reichenau's forces capture thousands of prisoners and continue advancing toward Warsaw. The road north is open. The strategic situation by mid-September is a disaster for Poland. Reichenau's 10th Army is approaching Warsaw from the southwest, having advanced over 200 kilometers in less than 2 weeks. To the north, German Army Group North has broken through Polish defences in Pomerania and is driving toward Warsaw from the northwest. The Polish army is being divided and encircled. Polish Commander Marshal Edward Rydz Śmigły attempts to withdraw forces eastward to establish new defensive lines, but German mobile forces are advancing faster than Polish units can retreat. The Luftwaffe controls Polish skies, bombing retreating Polish columns and destroying bridges to prevent organised withdrawal. September 8th, Reichenau's advance units reach the outskirts of Warsaw and engage Polish defences on the city's southern edge. The capital is nearly surrounded. The speed of the German advance has been so great that Polish mobilisation has never been completed, leaving substantial forces still forming when they are overrun by German panzers. September 17th delivers the fatal blow to Polish hopes. The Soviet Union invades Poland from the east, implementing the secret protocols of the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. Over 500,000 Soviet troops cross Poland's eastern border, facing minimal resistance because the Polish army is fully engaged, fighting Germany in the west. For Reichenau and other German commanders, Soviet intervention confirms that Poland's destruction is assured. Any Polish forces that might have retreated eastward to continue resistance now face Soviet armies blocking their escape. Poland is being crushed between two totalitarian powers, exactly as planned in the secret German-Soviet protocols. The Polish government flees to Romania. Organised Polish military resistance begins to collapse, though individual units continue fighting with extraordinary courage against impossible odds. The Warsaw operation reveals the limits of blitzkrieg doctrine against prepared urban defences. Reichenau's forces reach Warsaw's outskirts quickly, but the city does not fall easily. Warsaw's garrison, reinforced by army units retreating into the capital, numbers approximately 140,000 troops with substantial artillery. The city's buildings provide natural fortifications. Taking Warsaw will require either a prolonged siege or costly street fighting. Reichenau opts for siege, surrounding the city and subjecting it to continuous artillery bombardment and aerial bombing. For 2 weeks, Warsaw endures horrific bombardment. German artillery fires approximately 30,000 shells per day into the densely populated city. The Luftwaffe drops incendiary bombs, creating vast fires. Civilian casualties mount into the tens of thousands. Food and water supplies are cut. On September 27th, with the city in ruins and further resistance militarily hopeless, Warsaw surrenders to Reichenau's forces. Reichenau personally accepts the surrender of major Polish formations, including the fortress of Modlin, on September 29th. The ceremony is formal and correct, with Polish officers allowed to retain their sidearms in recognition of their unit's courageous defence. Reichenau understands military honour among professionals, and the Polish army has fought with determination despite overwhelming odds. But behind this veneer of military correctness, darker realities are already unfolding. SS Einsatzgruppen have followed the Wehrmacht into Poland, carrying lists of Polish intellectuals, political leaders, priests, and Jews marked for elimination. In towns throughout German-occupied Poland, mass arrests and mass shootings have begun. Wehrmacht units, including those under Reichenau's command, provide logistical support to these operations, securing areas for executions, providing transportation, guarding victims before they are killed. Some Wehrmacht soldiers witness the killings and write disturbed letters home. A few officers file complaints. Most do nothing. The statistics of the Polish campaign demonstrate the Wehrmacht's military effectiveness and hint at the horrors to come. In 5 weeks of fighting, Poland is completely defeated. The Polish army suffers approximately 66,000 killed, 134,000 wounded, and 694,000 captured. Entire Polish divisions have been destroyed or captured intact. Germany and the Soviet Union divide Polish territory according to their pre-war agreement. Poland ceases to exist as an independent state, not to re-emerge until 1945. German casualties are surprisingly light, given the scale of the victory. Approximately 16,000 killed, 30,000 wounded. Reichenau's 10th Army has performed exactly as planned, advancing over 225 kilometers, fighting multiple successful battles, and contributing decisively to the encirclement and destruction of Polish forces. This is the fastest, most complete military victory in modern European history to this point. It validates everything Reichenau has believed about blitzkrieg doctrine, combined arms warfare, and German military superiority. But the military victory masks the beginning of something far darker. In the 6 weeks of the Polish campaign, SS units have killed approximately 20,000 Polish civilians, primarily intellectuals and Jews, in operations that anticipate the much larger genocide to come. Wehrmacht units under Reichenau's command have participated in these crimes by providing security and logistics. Reichenau himself has issued orders emphasizing that Wehrmacht soldiers must show understanding for harsh measures against the Polish population. When some subordinate officers protest cooperation with SS killings, Reichenau responds that such actions are regrettable but necessary for securing German control. This is not the language of a professional soldier reluctantly implementing orders from political leadership. This is the language of a Nazi ideologue justifying mass murder. The combination of Reichenau's military brilliance and his ideological fanaticism makes him uniquely dangerous. He has proven he can command armies to great victories. He has also proven he will use those armies to advance Nazi crimes. Poland is only the beginning. September 8th, 1939. Sipielov, a small town in central Poland recently overrun by 10th Army's advance units. SS Einsatzgruppe I, operating in Reichenau's rear area, arrives in the town square with trucks and armed personnel. Wehrmacht soldiers from a supply unit are present, securing the area and directing traffic. The SS troops round up approximately 300 Polish civilians, primarily men of military age but also some women and children. They are marched to a clearing outside the town. Over the next 2 hours, they are systematically shot. Wehrmacht soldiers hear the gunfire, some move closer to investigate and witness the mass killing. Later that day, a Wehrmacht officer files a report documenting what occurred. The report moves up the chain of command, eventually reaching Reichenau's headquarters. His response is carefully worded but unambiguous. The SS operations are harsh but necessary for security, and Wehrmacht personnel must not interfere. This is one small massacre, among hundreds that will occur in German-occupied Poland. It is also evidence of Reichenau's conscious choice to enable genocide. Understanding what happens behind the lines in Poland requires understanding the relationship between the Wehrmacht and the SS Einsatzgruppen, the special task forces created by Heinrich Himmler and Reinhard Heydrich specifically for operations in Poland. The Einsatzgruppen are not regular police or military units. They are ideological murder squads, composed of SS officers, police personnel, and Nazi Party members selected for their political reliability and willingness to kill civilians. Their mission, defined in secret orders from Himmler, is the physical elimination of Poland's leadership classes. Government officials, military officers, teachers, priests, lawyers, and Jews in positions of influence. The goal is to decapitate Polish society, removing anyone capable of organizing resistance or preserving Polish national identity. This is not conventional military security operations. This is systematic political murder, the beginning of Nazi Germany's genocidal project in Eastern Europe. The operational relationship between Reichenau's 10th Army and the Einsatzgruppen is documented in captured German records. Before the invasion, agreements are negotiated between Wehrmacht High Command and SS leadership, defining how the Einsatzgruppen will operate. The SS units will follow immediately behind advancing Wehrmacht forces operating in the army's rear areas. The Wehrmacht will provide the Einsatzgruppen with transportation, fuel, communications, equipment, and maps. Wehrmacht security units will cooperate with SS operations by sealing off areas where executions will occur, preventing witnesses or interference. In exchange, the SS agrees to clear security operations with local Wehrmacht commanders to avoid interfering with military operations. These arrangements are formalized in writing. Reichenau, as a field army commander, is briefed on these procedures before the invasion begins. He raises no objections. The scale of killings in 10th Army's operational area during September and October 1939 is documented through both German records and Polish survivor testimonies. The SS Einsatzgruppe operating with 10th Army kills thousands of Polish civilians in the first 6 weeks of occupation. The targets follow the pre-planned categories. Local government officials are arrested and shot. Priests are executed after their churches are searched for weapons. Teachers are taken from schools and killed. Lawyers and doctors whose names appear on pre-prepared lists are hunted down. Jewish community leaders are murdered along with any Jews accused of anti-German activities. The methodology is ruthlessly systematic. SS units arrive in a town, consult their lists, round up designated victims, march them to pre-selected execution sites outside town, and shoot them. The bodies are buried in mass graves, often dug by victims themselves before execution. Wehrmacht soldiers are present at many of these operations, providing perimeter security. October 8th, 1939. A Wehrmacht chaplain attached to one of 10th Army's divisions files a formal complaint through military channels. He describes in detail having witnessed SS executions of Polish civilians, including women. He questions whether Wehrmacht cooperation with these killings is consistent with military honor and Christian morality. His complaint reaches Reichenau's headquarters, where it is reviewed by staff officers who forward it to Reichenau personally. Reichenau's written response, preserved in Wehrmacht archives, is revealing. He acknowledges that the SS operations are harsh and that some Wehrmacht personnel find them disturbing. However, he argues that the political security situation in occupied Poland is extremely dangerous, that the Polish population harbours partisan fighters and saboteurs, and that severe measures are necessary to protect German forces. He concludes that Wehrmacht personnel must show understanding for the actions of the SS and must not interfere with their security operations. The chaplain's complaint goes nowhere. Similar complaints from other officers receive similar responses. The pattern of Wehrmacht complicity in SS crimes is not limited to passive tolerance. In multiple documented cases, Wehrmacht units actively participate in killings or provide essential support that makes the killings possible. Wehrmacht trucks transport victims to execution sites. Wehrmacht soldiers guard collection points where civilians are held before being killed. Wehrmacht medical personnel sometimes witness executions and certify deaths without protest. Wehrmacht signal units provide communications equipment that allows SS commanders to coordinate multiple simultaneous operations. Wehrmacht food supplies are shared with SS units. This is not forced cooperation extracted from reluctant soldiers. This is institutional collaboration between two organizations working towards shared goals. Reichenau sets the tone from the top, making clear that cooperation is expected. The targeting of Poland's Jewish population begins immediately, though the systematic extermination that will characterize the Holocaust in later years has not yet been implemented. In September and October 1939, the approach toward Polish Jews combines harassment, economic persecution, forced labor, and selective killing. Jewish shops are vandalized or confiscated. Jewish professionals are expelled from their positions. Jewish communities are forced to form governing councils that must implement German orders. Thousands of Jewish men are seized for forced labor, building fortifications, or clearing rubble under brutal conditions. Jews accused of resistance activities or simply caught in SS roundups are shot. The killings are not yet the industrial-scale genocide of gas chambers and death camps, but they are systematic and ideologically driven. Reichenau's army provides the security environment that allows these persecutions to occur. His orders make clear that maintaining order takes priority over protecting civilian rights. By November 1939, when active combat operations in Poland have ended and occupation routines are being established, The death toll from SS operations in German-occupied Poland is estimated at 20,000 civilians killed. This figure includes the victims of the intelligence action, the systematic murder of Polish intellectuals and leaders. It includes Jews killed in pogroms and executions. It includes hostages shot in reprisal for acts of resistance. It does not include the hundreds of thousands who will die in the coming months and years as the occupation becomes more brutal. But even at this early stage, the pattern is established. SS units identify victims, Wehrmacht provides logistical support and security, killings occur systematically, and commanders like Reichenau ensure that Wehrmacht cooperation continues despite occasional protests from soldiers with functioning consciences. The question of Reichenau's knowledge and responsibility admits of only one answer. He knew. The evidence is overwhelming. Reports of SS killings reached his headquarters regularly. His own officers filed complaints that came to his desk. He personally issued orders directing Wehrmacht cooperation with SS security operations. His later orders, particularly the notorious Severity Order he will issue in 1941, make explicit his view that harsh measures against civilian populations are justified and necessary. Reichenau is not an unwitting participant in crimes ordered by others. He is not a professional soldier trying to maintain military discipline while political authorities commit atrocities beyond his control. He is an active enabler of mass murder, using his military authority to facilitate SS crimes. He does this because he shares the Nazi ideology that justifies these crimes. He believes Polish elites must be eliminated. He believes Jews are Germany's enemies. He believes military victory and political murder are complementary tools for achieving Nazi goals. The moral implications of Wehrmacht involvement in these early crimes are profound. The German army's leadership has made a choice to actively support mass murder of civilians. This is not something done to the Wehrmacht, this is something done by the Wehrmacht. Individual soldiers might be horrified or uncomfortable, but the institutional position is clear. Cooperation with SS killings is official policy. Protests are discouraged or ignored. Officers like Reichenau who enthusiastically support the killings are promoted and rewarded. The supposed distinction between the clean Wehrmacht and the criminal SS is revealed as fiction from the beginning. By the time Poland is fully occupied, the German army has been implicated in systematic murder of thousands of civilians. Reichenau is one of the primary architects of this complicity. His military brilliance in the tactical campaign makes him valuable to Hitler. His ideological reliability in supporting genocide makes him indispensable. He is the model of what the Nazi regime wants its generals to be: competent in war, ruthless toward enemies, unconstrained by traditional military ethics. The catastrophe he will help unleash in the Soviet Union is being prepared through the lessons learned in Poland. And he is learning all the wrong lessons. December 15th, 1939, a frigid morning at Wehrmacht headquarters in Koblenz, where Walther von Reichenau assumes command of 6th Army, one of the most powerful formations in the German military. The assignment comes directly from Hitler, who has reorganized his forces for the coming offensive in the West. 6th Army will play a crucial role in the invasion of France and the Low Countries, and Hitler needs a commander who combines tactical brilliance with absolute ideological loyalty. Reichenau is the obvious choice. At 55, he is at the peak of his military career, his reputation enhanced by the Polish victory. He takes command of an army that includes 26 divisions, among them some of Germany's best panzer and motorized units. Over the winter of 1939 to 1940, Reichenau transforms 6th Army into an elite fighting force through relentless training, rigorous discipline, and the ideological indoctrination that has become his trademark. When spring arrives, 6th Army will be ready for the campaign that will shock the world. The strategic situation facing Germany in early 1940 is precarious despite the Polish victory. Britain and France declared war on Germany in September, but have undertaken no major offensive operations, a period that journalists mockingly call the phony war. German forces in the West occupy defensive positions along the Siegfried Line, while the bulk of the Wehrmacht was engaged in Poland. Now, with Poland defeated, Hitler demands an immediate offensive against France before the Allies can fully mobilize their superior industrial resources. But the original German plan essentially a repeat of the failed Schlieffen Plan from World War I, is uninspiring. It calls for a massive assault through Belgium that will likely result in bloody stalemate, reminiscent of 1914. Reichenau studies the plan and finds it inadequate. He is among the senior commanders who advocate for a more radical approach, though the truly revolutionary concept will come from General Erich von Manstein. The final plan for Fall Gelb, Case Yellow, the invasion of France, reflects a compromise between conservative and aggressive approaches that plays to Reichenau's strengths. Army Group B, including Reichenau's 6th Army, will attack through Belgium and the Netherlands, drawing Allied forces northward. But the real blow will come from Army Group A, which will send panzer divisions through the supposedly impassable Ardennes forest, crossing the Meuse River and driving to the English Channel to cut off Allied forces that have moved into Belgium. Reichenau's mission is crucial. His army must penetrate deep enough into Belgium to convince the Allies that the main German effort is coming through Belgium, causing them to commit their best forces to stopping him. While the Allies focus on Reichenau, Army Group A will deliver the knockout blow. It is a sophisticated deception operation requiring Reichenau to fight hard enough to be convincing while not expending his forces prematurely. He relishes the challenge. May 10th, 1940. 0535. Reichenau's 6th Army crosses the Belgian and Dutch borders simultaneously with the main German offensive. The assault begins with massive Luftwaffe strikes against Allied airfields, destroying hundreds of aircraft on the ground. Airborne, forces seize key bridges and fortifications, including the supposedly impregnable Belgian fortress of Eben-Emael, which falls to German glider troops in less than 24 hours. Reichenau's ground forces advance rapidly behind artillery preparation and air support. The coordination between different arms is nearly flawless, demonstrating that the Wehrmacht has learned from the logistical problems experienced in Poland. Belgian border defences are overwhelmed within hours. Dutch forces retreat toward their waterlines. The speed of the German advance stuns Allied commanders, who had expected at least several days to mobilise and position forces. By nightfall on May 10th, German forces are 30 kilometres inside Belgian territory, and the Allied command has taken Reichenau's bait, May 12th through 16th, Battle of the Gembloux Gap. This becomes the largest engagement fought by 6th Army during the French campaign, a direct confrontation between Reichenau's forces and the elite French 1st Army. The Gembloux Gap is a relatively flat area south of Brussels, ideal for armoured warfare, where Belgian defensive lines are weaker than in the forested Ardennes to the south. French Commander General Georges Blanchard has positioned his best divisions here, including the French 2nd and 3rd Light Mechanized Divisions with their modern tanks. The Battle of Hanout, fought May 12th through 14th, just east of the Gembloux position, becomes the largest tank battle in history to that point. Over 600 German tanks from Reichenau's panzer divisions clash with approximately 240 French tanks. The fighting is intense and costly. French Samur and Charby tanks prove superior in armour and firepower to German Panzer Us and IVs, but German advantages in tactical coordination, air support and operational tempo prove decisive. By May 16th, French forces withdraw from the Gembloux Gap. Reichenau has accomplished his mission. He has tied down France's best mobile forces in Belgium, while Army Group A completes its breakthrough to the south. While 6th Army fights in Belgium, the strategic situation transforms with stunning speed. Army Group A's panzer divisions have crossed the Meuse River at Sedan on May 13th, smashing through French defences that were supposed to be impregnable. By May 20th, German tanks reach the English Channel at Abbeville, cutting off all Allied forces in Belgium and northern France from the main French armies to the south. Over 1 million Allied troops, including the British Expeditionary Force and France's best mechanised divisions, are trapped in a rapidly shrinking pocket. Reichenau receives new orders: shift from frontal attacks to encirclement operations, preventing the trapped Allied forces from breaking out southward. His divisions wheel northward toward the Channel coast, applying pressure from the east, while other German forces close in from south and west. The Battle of France, which Allied planners had expected to last months or years, is effectively won in 10 days of operations, May 28th. Belgium surrenders, King Leopold III, having concluded that further resistance is hopeless. Reichenau's forces are present at the surrender negotiations, accepting the capitulation of the Belgian army. Over 300,000 Belgian soldiers lay down their arms. This is Reichenau's third campaign, ending in complete enemy defeat. Poland, Belgium, and soon France. For the Belgian population, German occupation begins immediately. Wehrmacht units establish military government. SS security forces follow to identify and arrest political opponents and Jews. The pattern established in Poland repeats in Western Europe, though with somewhat less immediate brutality. Reichenau, commanding the occupation forces in the initial weeks, implements policies that blend military pragmatism with Nazi ideology. Public order is maintained through strict curfews and harsh punishment for resistance. Economic resources are systematically exploited for German benefit. But the mass killings that characterize Poland are largely absent in Belgium, at least initially. This is partly because Nazi racial ideology considers Western Europeans closer to Germans than Slavs, and partly because Hitler wants to minimize resistance in territory he plans to hold long-term. The Dunkirk evacuation, May 26th through June 4th, unfolds, while Reichenau's army maintains pressure on the shrinking Allied perimeter. Hitler's controversial halt order prevents German forces from launching all-out assault on the Dunkirk beaches, allowing the Royal Navy and civilian vessels to evacuate over 330,000 Allied troops to Britain. Reichenau is among the commanders frustrated by this decision. His forces are within striking distance of crushing the entire British expeditionary force, eliminating Britain's only substantial trained army. The escape of these forces means Britain can continue the war, but Hitler, influenced by Goering's promises that the Luftwaffe alone can destroy the trapped forces, orders the ground forces to halt. The evacuation succeeds, though the Allies are forced to abandon all their heavy equipment. For Reichenau, this is a minor blemish on an otherwise brilliant campaign. France is finished, regardless of whether British troops escape. June 5th. The final phase of the Battle of France begins. With Allied forces in the north eliminated, Wehrmacht turns south toward Paris and the remaining French armies. Sixth Army, having been rested and resupplied after the Belgian fighting, participates in the general advance southward. French resistance has lost all coherence. Units fight bravely in isolated actions, but there is no coordinated defence. The French government flees Paris, first to Tours, then to Bordeaux. On June 14th, German forces enter Paris unopposed, Reichenau's units among those parading through the French capital. The symbolism is overwhelming. Germany has defeated France, its great historical rival, in 6 weeks. The victory that eluded Germany through 4 years of blood-soaked struggle in World War I has been achieved in less than 2 months. Reichenau stands in Paris as a conquering general, the embodiment of Wehrmacht, effectiveness, and Nazi triumph. June 22nd, France signs an armistice in the same railway car where Germany signed the armistice in November 1918. Hitler's revenge for Versailles is complete. The statistics of the French campaign demonstrate Wehrmacht superiority even more dramatically than Poland. In 6 weeks, Germany has defeated France, Belgium, the Netherlands, and driven Britain from the continent. Allied casualties are catastrophic. Approximately 360,000 killed, wounded, or missing, plus nearly 2 million French soldiers taken prisoner. German casualties are comparatively light. Approximately 49,000 killed, 111,000 wounded. The ratio of forces engaged and the speed of German victory make this one of the most lopsided campaigns in modern military history. Reichenau's Sixth Army has performed exactly as required, fighting successful actions in Belgium, tying down Allied forces at crucial moments, and then exploiting the breakthrough to complete France's encirclement. His reward is promotion and recognition as one of Germany's premier field commanders. Hitler personally commends Reichenau for Sixth Army's performance, yet success in France creates dangerous overconfidence. Reichenau and many other Wehrmacht commanders conclude that German military superiority is so overwhelming that future campaigns will follow the same pattern of rapid, decisive victory. The French army was considered one of Europe's strongest militaries, yet it collapsed in weeks. If France can be defeated so easily, what enemy could resist the Wehrmacht? This logic leads directly to the catastrophic miscalculation about the Soviet Union. Reichenau will be among those arguing that the Red Army, despite its enormous size, can be defeated as quickly as France was. The lessons he draws from France are precisely wrong. He sees confirmation that Blitzkrieg doctrine is universally applicable, that ideological conviction gives Germany an insurmountable advantage, that speed and aggression can overcome any defensive preparations. He does not see that France's defeat resulted from specific French weaknesses in doctrine and command structure, from poor strategic decisions by Allied leadership, and from terrain that favoured mobile warfare. The Soviet Union will prove different in every crucial respect, but Reichenau does not recognise this. His faith in German superiority has become absolute. July 10th, 1940. Brussels, capital of occupied Belgium, where Walther von Reichenau assumes duties as military commander of German-occupied Belgium and northern France. The fighting has ended, but conquest is only the beginning of Nazi ambitions. Someone must transform occupied territory into functioning components of Hitler's new European order, extracting resources for Germany's continued war effort while suppressing any hint of resistance. Reichenau is Hitler's choice for this mission in Western Europe's industrial heartland. Over the next 9 months, he will demonstrate that his talents extend beyond battlefield command to include the administration of occupied territories according to Nazi principles. The population under his authority numbers approximately 12 million people, 8 million Belgians and 4 million French in the Nord-Pas-de-Calais region. They are about to learn what German military occupation means under a commander who views civilian administration through the lens of Nazi ideology. Reichenau's approach to occupation duty reflects his belief that military and political objectives are inseparable. Traditional Prussian military doctrine had maintained strict separation between military operations and civilian administration, with military commanders concerning themselves solely with tactical matters while leaving politics to civilian authorities. Reichenau rejects this separation entirely. He sees occupation as continuation of warfare by other means. His mission is not simply to maintain order, but to implement Nazi policies that will permanently subordinate Belgium and northern France to German interests. This means economic exploitation to support Germany's war machine, political suppression to prevent resistance, and ideological transformation to align occupied populations with Nazi goals. He establishes a military government that combines efficient German administrative practices with brutal political repression. The economic exploitation of occupied Belgium under Reichenau's command is systematic and devastating. Belgium had been one of Europe's most industrialized nations, with significant coal mining, steel production, and manufacturing capacity. All of this is now redirected to serve German war needs. Reichenau's economic staff inventories, Belgian industry, identifies which facilities are useful for German purposes and implements production quotas. Belgian coal mines must deliver specified tonnages to Germany. Belgian factories are retooled to produce components for German weapons. Belgian agriculture must supply food for German forces and for Germany itself, regardless of what this means for Belgian civilian food supplies. The Belgian franc is pegged to the Reichsmark at an artificially favourable rate for Germany, allowing German authorities to purchase Belgian goods at a fraction of their real value. This is not traditional military requisitioning to support occupation forces. This is planned economic looting designed to strengthen Germany while weakening occupied territories. The legal framework Reichenau establishes reveals Nazi occupation policy's true character. Upon assuming command, he issues detailed regulations governing civilian life under German rule. Curfews are established. Civilians must be indoors from 10 at night until 5 in the morning. Assemblies of more than 5 people require German permission. All radios must be registered with German authorities, and listening to Allied broadcasts is punishable by imprisonment. Belgian political parties are dissolved. Trade unions are banned. Newspapers operate under strict German censorship, printing only what military government approves. The Belgian king remains as figurehead, but actual authority rests entirely with Reichenau's military government. These measures go far beyond what international law permits for military occupation. They represent the Nazi conviction that occupied populations have no rights that Germans are bound to respect. August 1940. Reichenau implements the first anti-Jewish regulations in occupied Belgium and northern France. These initial measures are relatively restrained compared to what is occurring simultaneously in Poland, but they establish the framework for escalating persecution. Jewish businesses must be registered with German authorities and marked with signs identifying them as Jewish-owned. Jewish professionals face restrictions. Jewish lawyers cannot practice in German military courts. Jewish doctors cannot treat non-Jewish patients. Jews are prohibited from employment in government services or public education. A census of the Jewish population is ordered ostensibly for administrative purposes, but actually to facilitate future deportations. Belgium's Jewish population, approximately 140,000 people, faces these restrictions with growing alarm. Many Belgian Jews are refugees who fled to Belgium from Germany and Austria in the 1930s. They understand these seemingly minor regulations as the beginning of much worse persecution. The resistance to German occupation begins almost immediately, and Reichenau's response is ruthlessly disproportionate. Acts of sabotage occur. Telephone lines are cut, railways are obstructed, German vehicles are vandalized. These are minor annoyances, not serious military threats. But Reichenau treats any resistance as justification for brutal reprisals. He implements a hostage system. Prominent Belgian civilians are arrested and held as hostages for their community's good behaviour. When sabotage occurs, hostages are shot. The ratio is deliberately disproportionate. For one German soldier killed, 50 to 100 civilians are executed. For acts of sabotage, 10 to 20 hostages are shot. These reprisals are publicised through posters and newspaper announcements, designed to terrorise the population into submission. Wehrmacht firing squads carry out the executions, with Reichenau's written approval required for each action. This is terror as official policy, military force directed against civilians to crush resistance through fear. The coordination between Reichenau's military government and SS security police reveals his continued complicity in Nazi crimes. The SS and Gestapo establish headquarters in Brussels, Antwerp, and other major Belgian cities. Their mission is to identify and eliminate political opponents, resistance members, and Jews. Reichenau's military government provides them with essential support. Wehrmacht troops conduct raids and arrests at SS request. Military prisons hold SS captives. Military transportation moves prisoners to concentration camps in Germany. When SS security operations require Wehrmacht resources or coordination, Reichenau's staff provides them. There are occasional tensions between military and SS authorities over jurisdictional issues, but the overall relationship is cooperative. Both organisations are working toward the same goals: the pacification and exploitation of occupied Belgium. January 1941, Reichenau is relieved as military commander of Belgium and, northern France, reassigned to prepare for new operations. His 9-month tenure has established patterns that will continue throughout the occupation. Belgium has been economically plundered, politically suppressed, and prepared for the intensification of anti-Jewish persecution that will come later. His successor, General Alexander von Falkenhausen, will actually prove somewhat less harsh, attempting to moderate some of Reichenau's more brutal policies and later protecting some Jews from deportation. This contrast is revealing. Even within the Wehrmacht, individual commanders make choices about how harshly to implement occupation policy. Reichenau consistently chooses the harshest possible interpretation. Falkenhausen, while still complicit in German occupation, shows that some limited restraint is possible. Reichenau's approach represents not inevitable military necessity, but ideological choice. The question arises, why was Reichenau's occupation regime in Western Europe less immediately brutal than German occupation of Poland? The answer lies in Nazi racial ideology and strategic calculation. Nazi ideology classified Western Europeans as racially closer to Germans than Slavic peoples like Poles or Russians. This meant Western populations were candidates for Germanization and integration into the Nazi New Order, rather than immediate enslavement or extermination. Strategic calculation also mattered. Belgium and northern France were economically valuable and geographically positioned for potential use as a base for operations against Britain. Destroying these territories through mass violence would undermine their utility. Therefore, occupation policy emphasised exploitation and political control rather than demographic elimination. But this relative restraint was conditional and temporary. When resistance increased and German fortunes declined, occupation policy in Western Europe would become much harsher, including mass deportations and killings. Reichenau's initial policies laid the groundwork for later escalation. Reichenau's performance as military governor demonstrates an important pattern in his career. He is not merely following orders from higher authority, but is actively shaping policy in ways that advance Nazi goals. He could have implemented a more conservative occupation regime focused narrowly on military security. Some of the Wehrmacht commanders did exactly this. maintaining order while avoiding deep involvement in political repression or anti-Jewish persecution. Reichenau chooses differently. He sees occupation as an opportunity to implement Nazi ideology, to demonstrate that military force can transform occupied societies according to Nazi principles. His economic exploitation policies go beyond what is militarily necessary. His reprisal policies are deliberately excessive, designed to terrorize rather than simply deter. His anti-Jewish regulations anticipate policies that central Nazi authorities have not yet ordered for Western Europe. By spring 1941, when he leaves Belgium for new duties, Walther von Reichenau has proven himself valuable to the Nazi regime in both victory and occupation. He is about to be given the assignment that will define his historical legacy and reveal the full extent of his criminality: command in the war against the Soviet Union. March 30th, 1941. The Reich Chancellery's Great Hall in Berlin, where Adolf Hitler addresses over 200 senior Wehrmacht officers in a secret speech that will shape the character of Germany's coming invasion of the Soviet Union. The officers sit in rigid silence as Hitler speaks with unusual directness, abandoning the euphemisms that typically cloak Nazi policy in public. This will not be ordinary warfare between professional armies, he tells them. This will be a war of two ideologies, a war of racial extermination where normal rules do not apply. The coming conflict with the Soviet Union is existential struggle between National Socialism and Jewish Bolshevism, and it demands methods that conventional military ethics would reject. Political commissars attached to Red Army units must be shot immediately upon capture. Civilian populations in occupied Soviet territories must be treated with utmost harshness. The Wehrmacht must not shrink from measures that would be criminal in wars against Western powers. Walther von Reichenau, recently appointed to command 6th Army for the Eastern Campaign, listens without visible discomfort. Unlike some officers in the room whose faces betray unease, Reichenau nods approval. This is the kind of war he has been preparing to fight. Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of the Soviet Union, has been in planning stages since summer 1940. The strategic logic, from Hitler's perspective, is both ideological and practical. Ideologically, Nazi doctrine has always identified Bolshevism and the Soviet Union as Germany's ultimate enemies, the embodiment of the Jewish international conspiracy that National Socialism exists to destroy. Practically, the Soviet Union possesses vast resources, oil, grain, and territory that Hitler believes Germany needs for long-term survival and dominance. Moreover, Hitler reasons that defeating the Soviet Union will force Britain to make peace by eliminating its last potential continental ally. The operation is scheduled for June 1941, giving Germany approximately 3 months to prepare. Reichenau's 6th Army is assigned to Army Group South under Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, tasked with invading Ukraine and capturing Kiev, the Soviet Union's third largest city and Ukraine's capital. The military planning for Barbarossa is ambitious to the point of delusion. German intelligence estimates place Soviet strength at approximately 150 divisions east of the German-Soviet demarcation line established after Poland's partition. The actual Soviet forces number over 300 divisions with thousands of tanks and aircraft. German planners drastically underestimate Soviet reserves, productive capacity, and the Red Army's ability to replace losses. The invasion plan calls for 3 army groups to advance simultaneously along 1,000-kilometer fronts. Army Group North toward Leningrad, Army Group Center toward Moscow, and Army Group South toward Kiev and the Ukrainian industrial regions. The Wehrmacht expects to destroy the Red Army in massive encirclement battles near the border, then advance hundreds of kilometers to capture key cities before Soviet forces can establish new defensive lines. German planners estimate the campaign will last 8 to 10 weeks. Reichenau, participating in planning conferences, does not question these optimistic assumptions. He believes Wehrmacht superiority will prove as decisive against the Soviets as it did against Poland and France. April through May 1941. At 6th Army headquarters in Breslau, Reichenau and his staff translate strategic plans into operational orders. 6th Army will field 26 divisions, including multiple panzer and motorized divisions, approximately 300,000 men, supported by over 600 tanks. The Army's mission is to advance from southern Poland into western Ukraine, break through Soviet frontier defences, then drive northeast toward Kiev in coordination with 1st Panzer Group's deeper penetration. The operational challenges are enormous. Ukrainian terrain is vast, with few roads and numerous rivers that must be crossed under fire. Distances are far greater than anything German forces faced in France. Supply lines will stretch hundreds of kilometers, requiring massive logistics operations to sustain advancing forces, but Reichenau's confidence remains absolute. His staff produces detailed plans for the first week of operations, complete timetables showing exactly when each division should reach specified objectives. The plans assume limited Soviet resistance and rapid German advance. Reality will prove far different. June 6, 1941. Reichenau receives two orders that formalize the Wehrmacht's participation in genocide. The Commissar Order directs all Wehrmacht units to immediately execute any Soviet political commissars captured in combat. These commissars are Communist Party officials attached to Red Army units to ensure ideological reliability, and Nazi doctrine identifies them as the bearers of Judeo-Bolshevik ideology. The order explicitly states that commissars are not to be treated as prisoners of war, but are to be shot. The Barbarossa decree suspends normal military justice for crimes committed by Wehrmacht soldiers against Soviet civilians. Soldiers will not face court-martial for killing or abusing Soviet civilians unless such actions harm military discipline. These orders transform the Wehrmacht into an instrument of Nazi racial war. Some senior officers protest weakly or express private concerns. Reichenau does not. His later writings make clear he enthusiastically supports both orders as necessary measures for ideological warfare. The final days before invasion see unprecedented military mobilization along the Soviet frontier. 3.6 million German and Axis troops position themselves for the attack. Over 3,000 tanks are fueled and ready. The Luftwaffe concentrates thousands of aircraft at forward airfields. Ammunition dumps and fuel depots are established near the border. Despite this massive build-up, Stalin refuses to believe Germany will attack, dismissing intelligence warnings as British provocations designed to create conflict between Germany and the Soviet Union. Soviet forces remain in peacetime dispositions, vulnerable to the coming assault. On June 21st, advanced German units receive sealed orders to be opened at midnight. Officers gather in tents and command posts as church bells somewhere in the distance toll, midnight, opening envelopes that contain the invasion order. Reichenau personally briefs his corps commanders one final time, emphasizing the ideological nature of the coming campaign. June 21st, evening. Reichenau addresses division commanders and senior staff officers in a final pre-invasion meeting. His remarks, recorded in multiple officers' diaries, reveal his mindset. He describes the Soviet Union not simply as a military enemy, but as a mortal threat to European civilization. He characterizes Soviet communism as a Jewish ideology designed to enslave European peoples. He emphasizes that this campaign will be fundamentally different from the Western campaigns, that harshness and ruthlessness are not merely permitted but required. He tells his officers that they must abandon conventional notions of chivalry toward enemy soldiers and civilians. The Red Army will not be treated according to Geneva Convention rules. Soviet partisans and commissars will be shot. Civilian populations that resist or support partisans will face collective punishment. His language is explicitly ideological, framing military operations in terms of national, socialist, racial doctrine. This is not a professional soldier briefing officers on tactical objectives. This is a Nazi ideologue preparing his forces for a war of racial annihilation. The preparations include coordination with SS Einsatzgruppen that will follow 6th Army into Soviet territory. Einsatzgruppe C, assigned to Army Group South's area, will operate behind Reichenau's advancing forces. The mission of these SS units is explicit and documented: the systematic murder of Jews, Communist Party officials, and other groups designated as threats. Agreements between Wehrmacht and SS leadership establish procedures similar to those used in Poland. The Einsatzgruppen will have access to Wehrmacht supplies, communications, and intelligence. Wehrmacht units will provide security and logistical support for SS operations. Reichenau is briefed on these arrangements and approves them. Unlike some Wehrmacht commanders who will later express surprise or claim ignorance about Einsatzgruppen activities, Reichenau knows from the beginning exactly what these SS units are being sent to do. He does not merely tolerate their presence, he facilitates their mission. June 21st, night. Along the frontier, German soldiers wait in forward positions for the signal to attack. Officers synchronize watches. Artillery crews prepare firing data. Tank commanders review routes of advance one final time. The night is warm, the sky clear. Some soldiers write last letters home. Others check equipment with nervous energy. Veterans of Poland and France reassure younger soldiers that German superiority will bring quick victory. A few soldiers with more imagination or better geographic knowledge understand that they are about to invade the largest country on earth, a nation of 190 million people with reserves of men and material that dwarf Germany's resources. But such doubts are not expressed aloud. The Wehrmacht has never been defeated. Hitler's judgment has been proven correct repeatedly. Reichenau has prepared his army thoroughly. At 03:15, June 22nd, 1941, the artillery will open fire, and Germany will begin the campaign that will ultimately destroy it. The moral enormity of what is about to unfold cannot be overstated. Reichenau is not simply commanding an invasion. He is commanding an invasion explicitly framed as racial extermination, supported by orders that make Wehrmacht participation in genocide official policy. He has accepted orders to execute prisoners of war, to enable mass murder of civilians, to wage war unconstrained by international law or military ethics. He has done this not reluctantly, not as a professional soldier following orders he personally opposes, but as an ideological true believer who enthusiastically endorses every aspect of Nazi racial war. Over the next 27 million Soviet citizens, soldiers and civilians will die in the war Germany is about to begin. The Holocaust will kill 6 million Jews, half of them, in territories that Wehrmacht forces like Reichenau's will conquer and control. Walther von Reichenau, the aristocrat who chose the swastika, stands on the threshold of history's greatest crime. And he is eager to begin. June 22nd, 1941, 03:15. Along a front stretching from the Baltic Sea to the Black Sea, German artillery opens fire on Soviet positions. The bombardment is massive. Thousands of guns firing simultaneously, catching Soviet forces completely by surprise despite months of intelligence warnings. 15 minutes later, infantry and armour cross the border. At the same moment, the Luftwaffe launches strikes against Soviet airfields, destroying hundreds of aircraft on the ground before they can take off. The Soviet Air Force, one of the world's largest, is nearly annihilated in the first hours of the war. Walther von Reichenau's 6th Army, positioned in southern Poland near Lublin, advances into Soviet-occupied Ukraine toward the city of Lviv. The initial resistance is confused and disorganized. Soviet units, many still in peacetime barracks, are overrun before they can establish defensive positions. By nightfall, on the first day, Reichenau's forces have advanced 40 kilometers. The operation appears to be unfolding exactly as planned. The illusion of easy victory will last approximately 3 weeks. The first week of Barbarossa seems to vindicate every optimistic assumption in German planning. Reichenau's 6th Army smashes through Soviet frontier defences, advancing at speeds comparable to the French campaign. Soviet units fight with desperate courage in isolated pockets, but cannot establish coherent defensive lines. Communication breakdowns prevent Soviet commanders from coordinating responses to German breakthroughs. Luftwaffe air superiority allows German forces to move in daylight without fear of air attack. By June 30th, 6th Army has advanced over 250 kilometers, captured Lviv, and is approaching the Stalin Line, a belt of pre-war fortifications that Soviet forces are attempting to man. The scale of Soviet losses is staggering. Tens of thousands killed, hundreds of thousands captured, thousands of tanks and aircraft destroyed. German casualties are mounting but remain manageable. Reichenau reports to Army Group South headquarters that Soviet resistance is collapsing and that Kiev will fall within 2 weeks. But disturbing patterns emerge even in the first week that suggest the campaign will not follow the Polish or French models. Soviet units, even when encircled and cut off, continue fighting rather than surrendering. German soldiers are shocked by the intensity of Soviet resistance and the willingness of Red Army soldiers to fight to death. Soviet tank forces, though poorly coordinated, include 34 and KV tanks that are superior to any German armour. These Soviet heavy tanks shrug off hits from German anti-tank guns and destroy German panzers at ranges where German guns cannot penetrate Soviet armour. The distances are vast beyond German experience. A day's advance that would have covered the distance between major cities in France barely makes a dent in Ukrainian geography. Supply columns struggle to keep pace with advancing combat units, creating fuel and ammunition shortages even during the victorious advance. And behind the front lines, partisan warfare begins immediately, with Soviet soldiers bypassed in the rapid German advance, forming guerrilla groups that attack German supply lines. July 1941. The Battle of Uman develops as Reichenau's 6th Army, cooperating with 1st Panzer Group, encircles 2 entire Soviet armies in a pocket south of the city of Uman. This is the kind of large-scale encirclement operation that German doctrine prescribes, the maneuver that destroyed Polish and French armies in earlier campaigns. Over 10 days of intense fighting, German forces compress the pocket, destroying Soviet attempts to break out. The result is a tactical triumph. Approximately 100,000 Soviet prisoners, thousands of guns and vehicles captured or destroyed. But the victory reveals worrying truths. Soviet forces in the pocket fight with fanatical intensity, inflicting heavy casualties on German encircling forces. Even after organised resistance collapses, thousands of Soviet soldiers escape through German lines to continue fighting. The Wehrmacht lacks sufficient infantry divisions to properly seal the pocket while also maintaining forward momentum. Most troubling, even as the Uman pocket is being liquidated, Soviet units are forming new defensive lines to the east. The Red Army is not collapsing despite catastrophic losses. August 1941, 6th Army pushes toward Kiev across terrain that becomes increasingly difficult. Ukraine in summer is hot and dusty, the roads primitive and quickly churned to powder by thousands of military vehicles. Water is scarce. The advance slows as German units must pause for supply columns to catch up. Soviet resistance stiffens as fresh Red Army divisions arrive from interior military districts. German casualty rates increase. Reichenau's army, which began the campaign with over 300,000 men, has lost approximately 25,000 killed and wounded by mid-August. This is a higher casualty rate than the entire French campaign. Replacement personnel are slow to arrive. Equipment maintenance becomes critical. Tanks break down from wear and heat, requiring repairs that battlefield workshops struggle to complete. Yet the advance continues. German forces approach Kiev from the southwest, threatening to encircle the city and the Soviet armies defending it. September 1941. The Battle of Kiev develops into the greatest encirclement battle in military history. Hitler has ordered Army Group Center to detach 2nd Panzer Group southward to link up with 1st Panzer Group advancing from Reichenau's sector, creating a giant pincer movement around Kiev. Stalin, against his general's advice, orders Kiev held at all costs, refusing to authorize withdrawal even as the encirclement develops. The 2 German panzer groups link up east of Kiev on September 15th, trapping 4 Soviet armies. Over 2 weeks, German forces compress the pocket, destroying organized Soviet resistance. When the battle ends on September 26th, 665,000 Soviet soldiers are prisoners, thousands more are dead. It is the single largest encirclement in military history. Reichenau's 6th Army has played a crucial role, providing the infantry strength that sealed the southern side of the pocket while panzer forces executed the mobile operations. The victory appears to vindicate German strategy and Reichenau's operational methods. Yet Kiev is a Pyrrhic victory. The encirclement battle consumes all of September and half of October, the most crucial weeks of the campaign season. By the time Kiev falls, autumn rains have begun, turning Ukrainian roads to impassable mud. The advance season is nearly over. Moscow, the ultimate objective, is still hundreds of kilometers away, and German forces are exhausted. 6th Army has suffered over 75,000 casualties by October, 25% of its strength. Tank strength is down to 40% of establishment levels due to combat losses and mechanical failures. Infantry divisions are at 60 to 70% of authorized strength. Supply lines stretch over 1,000 kilometers from German railheads to forward units. The Soviet Union, despite losing millions of casualties, continues mobilizing fresh armies from its vast reserves. Intelligence reports indicate new Soviet divisions, forming in the Urals and Siberia, far beyond German reach. The Blitzkrieg has succeeded tactically but is failing strategically. Behind the front lines, darker operations unfold. Einsatzgruppe C, following Sixth Army into Ukraine, has begun systematic murder of Jewish populations in captured cities and towns. The methodology is horrific in its bureaucratic efficiency. SS units enter a newly captured town, force the Jewish population to assemble, under pretext of resettlement, march them to prepared execution sites outside town, and shoot them. September 29th and 30th, 1941, Babi Yar ravine near Kiev. Einsatzgruppe C, with support from Wehrmacht units, murders 33,771 Jews in 48 hours, the largest single massacre of the Holocaust to that point. Reichenau's Sixth Army provides perimeter security, preventing escape. Wehrmacht soldiers guard access roads, while machine gun fire echoes from the ravine. Some German soldiers witness the killings and are disturbed enough to mention it in letters home. Most say nothing. Reichenau receives reports of the operation and does not protest. October 1941. As autumn mud brings military operations to temporary halt, Reichenau drafts the order that will define his historical legacy and prove his enthusiastic complicity in genocide. The Severity Order, officially titled Conduct of Troops in Eastern Territory, is issued on October 10th, 1941. It goes far beyond even the Criminal Commissar Order and Barbarossa Decree issued before the invasion. Reichenau's order explicitly commands Wehrmacht soldiers to participate in the extermination of Jews, describing it as military necessity. The language is unambiguous. The soldier must show full understanding for the harsh punishment of Jewry, the spiritual bearer of Bolshevik terror. The order describes Jews as Germany's existential enemies and states that their elimination is essential to German security. It authorizes Wehrmacht cooperation with SS extermination operations. It forbids soldiers from showing sympathy towards Soviet civilians or prisoners. This is not an order reluctantly transmitting criminal directives from higher authority. This is Reichenau voluntarily going beyond what has been ordered, using his authority to ensure Wehrmacht participation in genocide. Hitler reads Reichenau's Severity Order and is delighted. He orders it distributed to other army commanders as a model for how ideological warfare should be conducted. Field Marshal von Manstein, Field Marshal von Reichenau, and other commanders subsequently issue similar orders following Reichenau's template. The Wehrmacht's transformation from professional military into instrument of genocide is complete. Reichenau has provided the doctrinal framework that legitimizes mass murder as military necessity. Historians will later debate the degree of Wehrmacht criminality on the Eastern Front. There can be no debate about Reichenau. His order is documentary proof of voluntary, enthusiastic participation in Holocaust. He has used his military authority to command 300,000 soldiers to support genocide. The number of deaths resulting directly or indirectly from his order is incalculable, but certainly reaches tens of thousands at minimum. By autumn 1941, Walther von Reichenau has proven himself to be exactly what he always was. Not a professional soldier who reluctantly implemented criminal orders, but a Nazi ideologue who used military command to advance genocide. And he has only 4 more months to live. October 10th, 1941, 6th Army Headquarters, Poltava, Ukraine. Walther von Reichenau signs his name to a document that will ensure his place in history as one of the most criminally complicit Wehrmacht commanders. The order, titled Conduct of Troops in Eastern Territory, but known to history as the Severity Order, begins with language that might seem unremarkable in military communications, discussing soldier conduct and discipline in occupied territory. But the content is extraordinary in its explicit endorsement of genocide. Reichenau writes that the soldier must show full understanding for the harsh punishment of Jewry. He describes Jews as the spiritual bearer of Bolshevik terror and states that their elimination is essential for German security. He commands that soldiers must be carriers of a ruthless national ideology and must understand that they are engaged in struggle to eliminate once and for all the Asiatic influence in the European cultural sphere. This is not coded language requiring interpretation. This is an explicit order for Wehrmacht participation in Holocaust. The context in which Reichenau issues this order is crucial for understanding both its purpose and its impact. By October 1941, the Holocaust in occupied Soviet territories is fully underway. Einsatzgruppen, operating behind the advancing Wehrmacht, have already murdered hundreds of thousands of Jews. The Baba Yar massacre has just occurred in Kiev, killing over 33,000 Jews in 2 days. Wehrmacht units throughout occupied Soviet territory are witnessing or participating in mass killings. Some soldiers are writing letters home, expressing unease about what they are seeing. Some officers are filing complaints through military channels, questioning whether Wehrmacht cooperation with SS murder operations is consistent with military honor. Reichenau's order is designed to silence these doubts, to provide ideological justification for participation in genocide, and to ensure that Sixth Army soldiers actively support rather than merely tolerate the extermination of Jews. The full text of Reichenau's order, preserved in Wehrmacht archives and introduced as evidence at Nuremberg, reveals the depth of his ideological commitment. After justifying harsh treatment of Jews, the order continues. The food situation at home makes it essential that troops should be fed off the land, and that furthermore the largest possible stocks should be placed at the disposal of the homeland. In enemy cities, a large part of the population will have to go hungry. Nothing, out of a sense of mistaken humanity, may be given to prisoners of war or to the population, unless they are in the service of the Wehrmacht. This is a starvation order, commanding that Soviet civilians and prisoners be deliberately denied food even when Wehrmacht units have supplies. Reichenau is ordering his soldiers to watch civilians starve to death. The order concludes with directions about partisan warfare, stating that any Soviet civilians in areas of partisan activity should be considered enemies and treated accordingly, effectively authorizing mass reprisals against civilian populations. The distribution and impact of Reichenau's order extends far beyond Sixth Army. Within days, copies reach Wehrmacht High Command, where senior officers discuss how to respond. Some conservative generals are uncomfortable with the order's explicit language and its obvious abandonment of traditional military ethics. But Field Marshal von Brauchitsch, Commander-in-Chief of the Army, reads the order and sees it differently. On October 28th, he circulates Reichenau's order to all Eastern Front army commanders as an example of proper ideological leadership. Hitler personally reads the order, praises it enthusiastically, and directs that it be distributed even more widely as a model for other commanders. Within weeks, Field Marshal von Manstein issues a similar order to 11th Army, Field Marshal von Reichenau issues similar directives, and other commanders follow suit. Reichenau's voluntary initiative becomes Wehrmacht-wide policy. The implementation of Reichenau's order produces documented consequences throughout 6th Army's area of operations. Wehrmacht units receive instructions from their commanders based on Reichenau's directive about cooperating with SS operations against Jews. When Einsatzgruppe C requires Wehrmacht support for murder operations, 6th Army units provide it. Wehrmacht soldiers set up cordons, preventing escape from execution sites. Wehrmacht trucks transport victims to killing fields. Wehrmacht supply officers provide fuel and ammunition to SS units conducting massacres. Wehrmacht intelligence officers share information about Jewish populations with SS commanders planning murder operations. Wehrmacht field kitchens refuse food to starving Soviet civilians and prisoners following Reichenau's starvation directive. All of this is documented in reports, orders, and post-war testimonies. Reichenau's order transforms policy into action, theory into murder. November 1941. A Wehrmacht chaplain attached to one of 6th Army's divisions witnesses a mass execution of Jews by SS units with Wehrmacht security support. He files a complaint through proper military channels, citing both moral and legal concerns about Wehrmacht participation in what he explicitly characterizes as murder of civilians. His complaint works its way up the chain of command, eventually reaching Reichenau's headquarters. Staff officers prepare a response for Reichenau's signature. The response acknowledges the chaplain's concerns but defends Wehrmacht cooperation with SS operations as military necessity in ideological warfare. The response cites Reichenau's own October 10th order as justification. The chaplain's complaint is dismissed. He is subsequently transferred to a different unit. The message is clear. Protests against Wehrmacht participation in genocide will not be tolerated and will damage the protester's career. Other potential critics take note and remain silent. The scale of killing enabled by Reichenau's order defies precise calculation but is certainly enormous. Einsatzgruppe C operates continuously in 6th Army's rear area throughout. autumn and winter of 1941. Between June and December 1941, this single Einsatzgruppe murders approximately 95,000 people, primarily Jews. Wehrmacht support, mandated by Reichenau's order, is essential to these operations. The Einsatzgruppe lacks sufficient personnel to conduct large-scale massacres without Wehrmacht assistance in securing areas, providing logistics, and preventing escape. Other Wehrmacht units following Reichenau's example of harsh treatment of civilians and prisoners kill additional thousands through starvation, exposure, and reprisal shootings. The causal connection between Reichenau's order and these deaths is direct. He commanded Wehrmacht support for genocide, and Wehrmacht units obeyed. December 1941. Winter descends on Ukraine with brutal intensity. Temperatures drop well below freezing. The ground hardens, making digging foxholes nearly impossible. Wehrmacht soldiers, still lacking adequate winter clothing despite lessons from the previous winter, suffer terribly. Frostbite casualties mount into the thousands. Soviet prisoners of war, held in open-air camps without shelter or adequate food per Reichenau's starvation orders, die by the tens of thousands from exposure and starvation. Wehrmacht guards watch prisoners freeze to death, following orders that forbid providing shelter or extra rations. The death rate of Soviet POWs in Wehrmacht custody during winter 1941 to 1942 approaches 60% in some camps. This is not accidental neglect but deliberate policy, flowing directly from orders like Reichenau's that characterize Soviet lives as worthless. The question of individual moral responsibility cannot be evaded. Reichenau does not issue the Severity Order because he is commanded to do so by higher authority. No one orders him to write this directive. He issues it voluntarily, exceeding what Hitler or Wehrmacht High Command requires, because he believes in its ideological content. He is not a professional soldier reluctantly implementing criminal orders from Nazi political leadership. He is a Nazi ideologue using military authority to implement genocide. His order is not ambiguous language that might be interpreted different ways. It explicitly commands harsh treatment of Jews, endorses their elimination, and orders starvation of civilians and prisoners. When subordinates question these policies, he reaffirms them. When Hitler praises the order, Reichenau accepts the praise with satisfaction. His later statements and writings show no regret, no moral doubt, no sense that he has done anything wrong. The legal judgment is equally clear. Under international law as it existed in 1941 and was subsequently codified at Nuremberg, Reichenau's order violates multiple provisions of the Hague and Geneva Conventions. It orders collective punishment of civilians, forbidden under international law. It orders deliberate starvation of prisoners of war, a war crime. It orders discrimination against prisoners and civilians based on race and religion, forbidden under both international law and basic human rights. Most damningly, it orders Wehrmacht support for mass murder of civilians, which is both war crime and crime against humanity. If Reichenau had survived the war and been tried at Nuremberg, this order alone would have been sufficient for conviction and execution. The judges at the High Command trial, prosecuting other Wehrmacht generals for similar orders, explicitly cited Reichenau's Severity Order as documentary proof of Wehrmacht criminality. The moral weight of Reichenau's order extends beyond the specific deaths it caused. It represents the Wehrmacht's institutional abandonment of military ethics, the moment when Germany's professional officer corps formally embraced genocide as military policy. Traditional military codes, including the Prussian military tradition Reichenau was raised in, held that soldiers were bound by honour to fight with courage, but also with restraint, that enemy soldiers once captured were protected by laws of war, that civilians were not legitimate military targets, and that military force must be proportional and discriminate. Reichenau's order rejects every one of these principles. It commands that ideology override honour, that racial enemies be exterminated regardless of surrender, that civilians be targets of deliberate starvation and murder, and that force be unlimited in pursuit of racial goals. This is the complete moral collapse of military professionalism, and Reichenau is its architect. By autumn 1941, he has become precisely what Nazi Germany needed, a general whose military competence served genocidal ends. He has built his cathedral of tanks and warplanes, and it is a cathedral of death. November 22nd, 1941. The first snow of winter falls on 6th Army positions south of Kharkov. German soldiers, many still wearing summer uniforms, supplemented by whatever winter clothing they could scavenge from captured Soviet depots, watched the snow with growing dread. They remember stories from their fathers and grandfathers about Napoleon's retreat from Moscow in 1812, about armies freezing in Russian winter. Wehrmacht High Command has assured them that the campaign would be over before winter, that Soviet resistance would collapse in weeks. But it is late November, the Red Army is still fighting, and winter has arrived. Walther von Reichenau, at his headquarters in Poltava, receives meteorological reports predicting temperatures dropping to minus 30 degrees Celsius in coming weeks. He sends urgent requests to Army Group South headquarters for winter clothing, additional ammunition, and replacement personnel. The responses are discouraging. Supplies are limited. Transportation capacity is insufficient. All fronts are making similar requests. 6th Army will have to endure winter with whatever it has. The logistical situation by late November is approaching crisis. 6th Army occupies a front stretching over 250 kilometers, defending recently captured territory while preparing for renewed offensive operations once weather permits. Supply lines stretch over 1,000 kilometers from German railheads to forward units. Soviet partisans operating in the vast forests and swamps of Ukraine attack these supply lines constantly, destroying trucks, ambushing convoys, and sabotaging railways. Soviet Air Force, having recovered from initial losses, begins contesting German air superiority, attacking German supply columns and rear area installations. The primitive Soviet railway system uses a different track gauge than European railways, requiring all supplies to be transloaded at the former Soviet border, creating massive bottlenecks. Winter weather makes unpaved roads impassable to wheeled vehicles, horses, which the Wehrmacht depends on for transport, despite its reputation for mechanization, die by thousands from cold and lack of fodder. By December, 6th Army units are receiving only 70% of required fuel and 50% of required ammunition, December 5th through 6th, 1941. The Soviet winter counteroffensive begins, not against Reichenau's Army Group South, but against Army Group Center before Moscow. Fresh Soviet divisions brought from Siberia, equipped with winter clothing and experienced in cold weather operations, smash into exhausted German forces that have advanced to within sight of Moscow's suburbs. The Germans, caught completely by surprise, retreat in disorder. This is the first major German defeat of the war, shattering the myth of Wehrmacht invincibility. News of the disaster reaches Reichenau's headquarters, creating alarm. If the Soviets can defeat Army Group Center, they can attack elsewhere. Within days, Soviet forces begin probing attacks against 6th Army positions, testing German defenses. These are not major offensive operations yet, but they signal that the Red Army is transitioning from defense to attack. The strategic initiative is slipping from German hands. Christmas 1941 is the most miserable Christmas most German soldiers have ever experienced. 6th Army occupies defensive positions along the Donets River in eastern Ukraine, dug into frozen ground, enduring temperatures that reach minus 35 degrees Celsius. Frostbite casualties exceed combat casualties. Over 20,000 men suffer severe frostbite, requiring medical treatment or evacuation. Soldiers wrap their feet in newspaper and rags, trying desperately to prevent frostbite that can lead to amputation. Tanks cannot start because engine oil freezes solid. Crews must light fires under engines for hours before vehicles can move. Machine guns freeze and jam. Bread freezes so hard it must be broken with axes. Soldiers burn furniture from abandoned Ukrainian villages, trying to stay warm enough to survive. Medical facilities are overwhelmed with frostbite cases, pneumonia, and other cold-related illnesses. The professional German army that invaded the Soviet Union 6 months earlier is becoming a frozen mob struggling simply to survive. January 1942. Soviet forces launched the Barvenkovo-Lozovaya offensive, striking 6th Army positions south of Kharkov. This is not the overwhelming Soviet assault that is hammering Army Group Center, but it is powerful enough to drive 6th Army back over 100 kilometers, the first significant German retreat in Reichenau's career. Soviet attacks feature mass infantry assaults, supported by artillery and armor, tactics that accept enormous casualties to achieve breakthrough. German defensive positions, hastily dug in frozen ground, prove inadequate against concentrated assault. Individual German units fight skillfully and inflict disproportionate casualties on attacking Soviets, but the Red Army's advantage in manpower allows it to replace losses and continue attacking. Reichenau fights a skillful defensive withdrawal, preventing encirclement while trading space for preservation of his forces, but the psychological impact is devastating. Sixth Army is retreating. The invincible Wehrmacht is being pushed back. The strain on Reichenau personally is evident to his staff officers. At 57, he is one of the older field army commanders, and the stress of continuous operations since June is taking its toll. He has always maintained personal fitness through daily exercise, but even he finds it difficult to maintain routines in the harsh conditions of Russian winter. He sleeps irregularly, often only a few hours per night, waking frequently to review situation reports or speak with subordinate commanders. His diet is poor, as even senior officers suffer from limited and monotonous rations. He smokes heavily, a habit that is increased under stress. His temper, never gentle, becomes harsh. He relieves several subordinate commanders for perceived failures, sometimes unfairly. Staff officers notice that his hands shake when he reads reports of Soviet attacks or when supply shortfalls prevent planned operations. He continues to maintain outward confidence, issuing orders and planning counterattacks, but those closest to him can see the strain. February 1942. The Soviet offensive finally exhausts itself, having pushed army groups south back but failing to achieve breakthrough and encirclement. Both sides settle into exhausted stalemate, consolidating positions and waiting for spring thaw and summer campaign season. The winter crisis has cost Sixth Army enormously. Over 100,000 casualties total, including killed, wounded, sick, and missing. This exceeds the Army's casualties in the entire French campaign and approaches the Army's losses in the initial victorious phase of Barbarossa. Infantry divisions that began the campaign at full strength of over 16,000 men now field 8 to 10,000 combat effectives. Panzer divisions have lost half their tanks to combat, mechanical breakdown, and inability to recover damaged vehicles during retreat. Morale has suffered its first serious blow. Soldiers who believed in certain victory now understand that the Soviet Union is not defeated and that the war will continue indefinitely. The contrast between German expectations in June 1941 and reality in February 1942 is stark and sobering. German planning had predicted complete victory in 8 to 10 weeks. Instead, 8 months of fighting have produced only partial success at catastrophic cost. Soviet territory captured is vast by European standards, but small relative to Soviet depth. Key objectives like Moscow and Leningrad remain in Soviet hands. Most crucially, the Red Army has not been destroyed. Despite losing millions of casualties, the Soviet Union continues, mobilizing new armies, producing new weapons, and demonstrating ability to conduct successful operations against Wehrmacht forces. German casualties on the Eastern Front, approximately 900,000 by February 1942, exceed all previous German casualties in World War II combined. This is war of attrition, not blitzkrieg, and Germany cannot win a war of attrition against the Soviet Union's superior manpower and resources. Reichenau in February 1942 faces military reality that contradicts everything he has believed. He has believed in German racial superiority, in Wehrmacht, invincibility, in blitzkrieg doctrine as universally applicable, in the certainty that National Socialist ideology gives Germany insurmountable advantages. All these beliefs are being challenged by Soviet resistance and German failure to achieve decisive victory. Yet he cannot publicly acknowledge doubt. He has built his career on ideological certainty, on being Hitler's loyal general, on never questioning Nazi goals or methods. To admit that the Soviet campaign might fail would be to admit that his entire worldview is wrong, so he does not admit it. He plans for renewed summer offensive, writes orders emphasizing will and determination as keys to victory, demands that his troops maintain faith in ultimate German triumph. He has become trapped by his own ideology, unable to see that the war he helped start is becoming the catastrophe that will destroy Germany. Reichenau's physical condition deteriorates through early January 1942, though he conceals this from most of his staff. He suffers recurring headaches and occasional dizziness. His blood pressure is elevated, a condition he has struggled with for years, but which has worsened under the stress of continuous combat operations. Army doctors recommend rest and reduced workload. Reichenau refuses. He insists on maintaining his command responsibilities and his personal routine of daily exercise. On January 12, 1942, he goes jogging near his headquarters in Poltava despite sub-zero temperatures and against his doctor's advice. The exercise is part of his lifelong commitment to physical fitness, a demonstration to his staff and troops that he remains vigorous despite his age. It is also an act of denial, an attempt to prove to himself that he is still the energetic commander who led victorious armies in Poland and France. The jog will prove fatal, though not immediately. The combination of intense cold, physical exertion, and underlying health problems creates conditions for the stroke that will strike 3 days later. Reichenau's time is running out. Within 5 days, he will be dead, and 6th Army will pass to new command. The question of what he might have done had he lived will haunt historical analysis, but the question is ultimately unanswerable. What is certain is that he dies having transformed himself from Prussian aristocrat into Nazi, war criminal, having commanded armies to great victories and terrible crimes, having proven that military brilliance in service of genocidal ideology produces only catastrophe. January 15th, 1942, mid-morning at 6th Army Headquarters, Poltava. Walther von Reichenau is reviewing supply reports and casualty statistics when he suddenly stands from his desk, disoriented. Staff officers in the adjacent room hear a crash as he collapses. Aides rush to his office to find the field marshal unconscious on the floor, his breathing laboured and irregular, the right side of his face drooping noticeably. An army doctor is summoned immediately and diagnoses a massive cerebral stroke. Reichenau is moved to his quarters and receives emergency medical treatment, but his condition does not improve. He remains unconscious, partially paralysed on his right side. The doctor's prognosis is grim. Even if Reichenau survives, he will be incapacitated for months and may never fully recover. Word is sent immediately to Army Group South headquarters and to Berlin. Adolf Hitler, informed of Reichenau's collapse, orders that Germany's best medical specialists attend him and that he be evacuated to Leipzig for treatment by neurological experts. A Heinkel, He-111 aircraft is dispatched to Poltava to transport the stricken field marshal to Germany. The emergency evacuation unfolds rapidly but under difficult conditions. January weather in Ukraine is brutally cold and flying conditions are dangerous. The Heinkel transport arrives in Poltava on January 17th, and medical personnel carefully transfer the unconscious Reichenau aboard on a stretcher. He is accompanied by his personal physician, several nurses, and staff officers who will report on his condition. The aircraft departs Poltava in mid-morning, heading west toward Leipzig. Flight conditions are poor, low visibility due to snow, icing conditions, and strong winds. Approximately 3 hours into the flight, while approaching Leipzig for landing, the aircraft crashes during its landing approach. The exact cause is never definitively established. Post-war analysis suggests either pilot error due to poor visibility or mechanical failure exacerbated by weather conditions. The aircraft impacts the ground heavily, causing severe damage to the fuselage. Several personnel aboard are injured, though none killed in the crash itself. Reichenau, already critically ill from his stroke, suffers additional trauma from the crash impact. Reichenau is extracted from the wrecked aircraft and rushed to Leipzig's main military hospital, but his condition is hopeless. The combination of massive stroke and crash injuries has caused irreversible damage. He never regains consciousness after the crash. On January 17th, 1942, at approximately 5:30 in the evening, Field Marshal Walther von Reichenau dies in Leipzig Military Hospital at age 57. Official cause of death is listed as complications from stroke, though the crash certainly contributed. News of his death is immediately transmitted to Berlin, where Hitler receives the information with visible emotion. The Führer has lost one of his most loyal and ideologically reliable commanders, a general who combined military competence with enthusiastic support for Nazi goals. Hitler orders a state funeral with full military honours, the most elaborate ceremonial treatment given any Wehrmacht commander to that point in the war. The public reaction to Reichenau's death reveals his status within the Nazi regime. Hitler issues a personal eulogy, broadcast on German radio, praising Reichenau as one of the most outstanding soldiers and emphasizing his National Socialist conviction and ideological clarity. The eulogy makes explicit what military colleagues have always. Reichenau was valued not just for military skill but for ideological loyalty. Propaganda Minister Joseph Goebbels writes in his diary that Germany has lost a general of truly National Socialist character, the highest praise in Nazi ideology. Wehrmacht High Command issues formal condolences emphasizing Reichenau's contributions to building the Wehrmacht and his victories in Poland, France, and Russia. The German press publishes lengthy tributes describing Reichenau as embodiment of the new type of general, combining traditional military excellence with modern ideological commitment. Reichenau is being memorialized as the model Nazi general, exactly what he aspired to be. January 22nd, 1942, Berlin. Reichenau's state funeral is conducted with elaborate ceremony at the Reich Chancellery. The casket, draped with Nazi flags and surrounded by military honor guard, lies in state as senior Nazi and military officials pay respects. Hitler attends personally, placing a wreath and delivering brief remarks emphasizing Reichenau's loyalty and courage. Hermann Göring, Reichsführer SS Heinrich, Himmler, and Field Marshal Wilhelm Keitel are present, representing the Nazi Party, SS, and Wehrmacht, respectively. The ceremony is filmed for newsreel distribution, presenting Reichenau as a fallen hero of the German war effort. His widow and family receive official condolences and generous state pensions. After the funeral, Reichenau is posthumously promoted to the rank he had sought throughout his career. Field Marshal, General Feldmarschall, the highest military rank Germany can bestow. The promotion is partly honorific, acknowledging his service, but it also serves propaganda purposes, creating another heroic narrative for the German public. The military impact of Reichenau's death is immediate and significant. 6th Army, which he had commanded for over a year and transformed into one of the Wehrmacht's elite formations, must be assigned a new commander. Hitler selects General Friedrich Paulus, previously Deputy Chief of the Army General Staff, to replace Reichenau. This choice will prove fateful. Paulus is a competent staff officer, but lacks Reichenau's charisma, ideological fervour, and combat experience. More importantly, Paulus lacks Reichenau's personal relationship with Hitler and the confidence to argue forcefully for operational decisions. Under Paulus's command, 6th Army will advance towards Stalingrad in summer 1942, become encircled in November, and be destroyed in February 1943. Historians have long debated whether Reichenau would have avoided the Stalingrad disaster had he lived. The question is unanswerable but fascinating. Would Reichenau's greater confidence have led him to argue more forcefully against Hitler's orders to hold Stalingrad? Or would his ideological loyalty have made him even more determined to obey, regardless of military logic? The historical judgment on Reichenau's career cannot be separated from the timing of his death. He dies at the moment when Germany's Eastern Front strategy is beginning to unravel, but before the catastrophic defeats that will come later. He experiences only the initial winter crisis, not the sustained retreat and ultimate collapse. He dies as a victorious field marshal, not as a defeated general, facing war crimes prosecution. His reputation within Nazi Germany remains unblemished at his death. He is remembered as hero rather than criminal. This timing shapes how Reichenau is remembered in post-war German military history. Because he dies relatively early in the war and never faces prosecution, Wehrmacht apologists can later claim he was simply a talented soldier following orders, distinct from the true criminals in SS or Nazi Party leadership. This is a lie, but Reichenau's death makes the lie easier to tell. The truth about Reichenau's career is documented in captured German records that survived despite Nazi efforts to destroy evidence. His Severity Order alone is sufficient to establish his status as war criminal. His cooperation with Einsatzgruppen, mass murder operations, is documented in reports and testimonies. His role in implementing starvation policy towards Soviet prisoners and civilians is proven by his own orders. His enthusiastic support for aggressive war and his participation in planning criminal operations are matters of record. If Reichenau had survived to face prosecution at Nuremberg, he would almost certainly have been convicted and executed, likely hanged like Field Marshal Keitel and other convicted Wehrmacht leaders. The documentary evidence against him, is overwhelming. His ideology was genuine, his crimes were voluntary, and his military authority made him responsible for the actions of forces under his command. Yet Reichenau's death denies justice to his victims and allows his reputation to be sanitized by those who want to preserve the clean Wehrmacht myth. He dies in his bed, unconscious and pain-free, rather than facing trial for his crimes. He receives a state funeral rather than a war crimes tribunal. He is mourned as hero rather than judged as criminal. This is a profound moral injustice. The hundreds of thousands of Soviet civilians and prisoners who died because of his orders, the Jews murdered with Wehrmacht support he facilitated, the Polish civilians killed with his cooperation, none of them received justice. Reichenau escapes accountability through death, and this escape allows his defenders to construct false narratives about his character and actions. The question of what motivated Reichenau throughout his career admits of only one answer: ideological conviction. He was not a professional soldier corrupted by circumstance or forced by superior orders to commit crimes. He was a true believer in National Socialist ideology from the early 1930s until his death. He believed in racial hierarchy, in German superiority, in the necessity of conquering living space through war, in the elimination of Jews and other supposed racial enemies. He expressed these beliefs consistently in his writings, orders, and actions. He volunteered for criminal missions rather than being compelled to accept them. He went beyond what was ordered in implementing genocidal policies. He was proud of his ideology and saw no contradiction between military professionalism and Nazi crimes. He was exactly what he appeared to be: a Nazi general, the fusion of Prussian military tradition with totalitarian ideology, and the result was catastrophe on massive scale. Reichenau's legacy is finally being properly assessed by historians who have access to complete documentary records. The post-war clean Wehrmacht myth has been systematically dismantled by decades of scholarship demonstrating Wehrmacht complicity in genocide, war crimes, and aggressive war. Reichenau's role as one of the most ideologically committed Wehrmacht commanders is now well established. His Severity Order is taught in German military academies as an example of how military professionalism was corrupted by Nazi ideology. His career is studied as cautionary tale about dangers of militaries serving totalitarian regimes. The aristocrat who chose the swastika is finally recognized for what he was: a war criminal whose military competence made him more dangerous, not less culpable. He died believing he was a hero. History judges him a criminal, and that judgment is just January 18th, 1942, 6th Army Headquarters, Poltava. Officers gather to hear the official announcement of Reichenau's death and the appointment of his successor. General Friedrich Paulus, arriving from Germany where he had been serving as Deputy Chief of Operations at Army High Command, assumes command of an army still reeling from winter crisis and from losing its charismatic commander. Paulus is 51 years old, a highly educated staff officer with reputation for meticulous planning but limited combat command experience. He looks the part of a Prussian general, tall, thin, impeccably uniformed, even in field conditions, formal in manner. He is also fundamentally different from Reichenau in temperament and ideology. Where Reichenau was a Nazi true believer, Paulus is a traditional conservative officer who serves the regime without embracing its ideology. Where Reichenau was confident to the point of arrogance, Paulus is cautious and deferential to higher authority. 6th Army is about to experience a dramatic change in command culture. Whether this change might have prevented the disaster at Stalingrad remains one of history's great counterfactuals. The immediate impact of Reichenau's death on 6th Army morale is complicated. Some officers and soldiers genuinely mourned him as a commander who had led them to victory and who shared the hardships of winter campaign. His daily exercise routine and visible presence at forward headquarters had made him popular with troops despite his harsh discipline. Other soldiers, particularly those disturbed by Wehrmacht participation in atrocities, are quietly relieved that his ideological fervour will no longer drive policy. A Wehrmacht chaplain writes in his diary, later captured and preserved, that he hopes the new commander will return the army to proper military standards rather than Reichenau's mixture of military operations and ideological warfare. But most soldiers' concerns in January 1942 are more immediate: survival through winter adequate supplies, and whether Soviet offensives will force further retreat. Command changes at army level seem distant from these daily struggles. Spring 1942 brings temporary respite as Soviet offensives exhaust themselves and weather improves enough to allow resumed operations. Paulus uses this period to rebuild 6th Army strength, integrating replacement personnel and equipment arriving from Germany. The army's strength grows from the roughly 200,000 combat effectives it fields in February to over 280,000 men by June. Panzer and motorized divisions receive replacement tanks and vehicles. Artillery units are brought up to strength with new guns. Infantry divisions absorb replacement personnel, though many are recent conscripts with limited training. Paulus proves effective at this reconstruction work, his staff officer background serving him well in the administrative and logistical challenges of rebuilding a battered army. By summer 1942, 6th Army is again ready for offensive operations. June 28, 1942. Operation Blue begins, Germany's summer offensive aimed at capturing Soviet oil fields in the Caucasus and the industrial city of Stalingrad on the Volga River. 6th Army is central to this operation, assigned to advance eastward across the Don River steppe towards Stalingrad. The strategic logic is that capturing Stalingrad will cut Soviet supply lines along the Volga River and protect the northern flank of German forces advancing into the Caucasus. What begins as one objective among many gradually transforms into obsession as Hitler fixates on capturing the city that bears Stalin's name. By August, 6th Army is committed to frontal assault on Stalingrad itself, a heavily defended city of over 400,000 people where urban combat negates German advantages in mobile warfare. Paulus executes his orders, driving 6th Army into the city despite mounting casualties. August through November 1942. The Battle of Stalingrad becomes an attritional nightmare unlike anything 6th Army experienced under Reichenau's command. German forces advance block by block, building by building, sometimes room by room through ruined factories and apartment buildings, defended by Soviet forces fighting with fanatical determination. Soviet defenders used the urban terrain brilliantly, negating German superiority in armor and air power. Every advance costs German lives. Every building captured is then subjected to Soviet counterattacks. 6th Army casualties mount steadily, 5,000, then 10,000, then 20,000. Paulus requests reinforcements and receives some, but never enough to replace losses. By November, 6th Army has been bled white in Stalingrad's rubble. The question arises, would Reichenau have committed 6th Army to this urban slaughter? His tactical instincts had always favoured manoeuvre over attrition, but his ideological commitment to Hitler might have made him even more determined to take the city. The question is unanswerable. November 19th, 1942. Soviet Operation Uranus begins. Massive pincer attacks north and south of Stalingrad designed to encircle 6th Army and other German forces in the city. The operation succeeds beyond Soviet hopes. Within 4 days, Soviet mobile forces link up west of Stalingrad, completing the encirclement of approximately 290,000 German and Allied troops. 6th Army, the elite formation that Reichenau built and commanded, is trapped. Paulus requests permission to break out westward while escape is still possible. Hitler refuses, ordering 6th Army to hold Stalingrad while relief forces attempt to break through the Soviet encirclement. Goering promises that the Luftwaffe can supply the trapped army by air, a promise that proves wildly optimistic. 6th Army's fate is sealed. The question haunts historical analysis. Would Hitler have allowed Reichenau to break out where he forbids Paulus? Reichenau's personal relationship with Hitler was stronger, but his ideological loyalty might have made him accept the order to hold. The Siege of Stalingrad, November 1942 through February 1943, destroys 6th Army. Cut off from supply, subjected to constant Soviet attacks, enduring a second Russian winter, the trapped German forces slowly collapse. Luftwaffe transport aircraft attempt to supply the pocket but deliver only a fraction of required supplies. Many aircraft are shot down by Soviet fighters and anti-aircraft fire. Rations are cut repeatedly, first to normal levels, then to reduced levels, finally to starvation levels, of 200 grams of bread per day. Horses are slaughtered for meat. Wounded cannot be properly treated due to lack of medical supplies. Fuel runs out, immobilizing remaining vehicles. Ammunition dwindles to final reserves. Soviet forces compressed the pocket gradually, capturing one German position after another. Paulus continues to obey Hitler's orders to hold, even as his army disintegrates. January 31st, 1943. Paulus, promoted to Field Marshal by Hitler in a final gesture meant to encourage continued resistance, surrenders the southern portion of the Stalingrad pocket to Soviet forces. The northern pocket surrenders 2 days later, on February 2nd. Of the 290,000 German and Allied troops encircled in November, approximately 91,000 survive to surrender, the rest are dead. Of the 91,000 prisoners, only about 6,000 will survive Soviet captivity to return to Germany after the war. Sixth Army. The formation that Reichenau transformed into one of Germany's elite field armies ceases to exist. A new Sixth Army will be formed later in 1943, but it is a different organization entirely. Reichenau's army dies at Stalingrad. The contrast between Sixth Army's performance under Reichenau and its fate under Paulus is striking. Under Reichenau, the army won brilliant victories in Poland, France, and the initial Soviet campaign, though at the cost of complicity in war crimes. Under Paulus, the army is destroyed at Stalingrad through a combination of Hitler's strategic errors, Paulus's excessive deference to higher authority, and circumstances that neither commander could entirely control. But the comparison is complicated by timing. Reichenau commanded Sixth Army during Germany's period of military dominance, when Wehrmacht advantages in training, equipment, and doctrine were overwhelming. Paulus commanded when strategic situation had shifted, when Soviet forces had learned from defeats and were growing stronger while German strength was overstretched. We cannot know whether Reichenau would have avoided Stalingrad disaster, because we cannot know how he would have responded to Hitler's order to hold the city. His death leaves this question forever unanswerable. What is certain is that the ideological indoctrination Reichenau imposed on Sixth Army contributed to the catastrophe at Stalingrad. Reichenau's orders had taught soldiers that retreat is betrayal, that determination can overcome material disadvantages, that ideology matters more than tactical circumstances. This indoctrination made Sixth Army soldiers less likely to question suicidal orders, less able to recognize when military situation was hopeless. Paulus's deference to Hitler's authority reflected not just personal characteristics, but Wehrmacht culture that Reichenau had helped create, where obedience to the Führer was absolute and where ideological loyalty was considered more important than operational judgment. The army Reichenau built was highly effective at offensive operations, but psychologically unprepared to acknowledge defeat and take necessary measures to preserve itself. This made it vulnerable to catastrophic loss when strategic circumstances turned against Germany. The destruction of Sixth Army at Stalingrad is often identified as the turning point of World War II on the Eastern Front. This is partly true. Stalingrad was a devastating psychological and material defeat for Germany, proving that Wehrmacht forces could be completely destroyed by Soviet armies. But the turning point had actually come earlier, during the winter crisis of 1941 to 1942 that Reichenau experienced before his death. That winter demonstrated that Germany could not achieve quick victory against the Soviet Union and that the war would become the prolonged attrition struggle. Germany could not win. Stalingrad confirmed this reality through catastrophic loss, but did not create it. Reichenau died as the strategic situation was shifting against Germany. He did not live to see the full consequences of the war he had helped initiate, but those consequences were already becoming inevitable. The aristocrat who chose the swastika set in motion forces that would ultimately destroy the regime he served, and the army he built would be among the war's casualties. May 8, 1945. The German High Command signs the instrument of unconditional surrender, ending World War II in Europe. In the ruins of Nazi Germany, Allied investigators begin gathering documents and interrogating prisoners to understand how the Wehrmacht participated in the greatest crime in history. What they discover contradicts decades of Prussian military mythology. The German general, staff, supposedly bound by codes of honor and professionalism, had systematically supported genocide. And Walther von Reichenau, dead for over 3 years, emerges as the template for Wehrmacht criminality. His Severity Order, found in captured files, becomes exhibit number 1 in proving that the German military was not a clean institution manipulated by Nazi politicians, but an active participant in racial extermination. Yet the scale of complicity extends far beyond one dead field marshal. Documents reveal that multiple army commanders issued orders similar to Reichenau's, that Wehrmacht High Command distributed his order as an example to follow, and that Hitler personally praised it. The General Staff's guilty secret is that Reichenau was not an aberration but a model they chose to emulate. December 1941. Even before Reichenau's death, his Severity Order circulates through Wehrmacht command channels with devastating effect. Field Marshal von Brauchitsch, Commander-in-Chief of the Army, reads Reichenau's order and recognizes its significance. Rather than reprimanding Reichenau for exceeding his authority or for issuing orders that violate international law, Brauchitsch circulates the order to other Eastern Front commanders on October 28 with notation that it represents proper ideological leadership. This is not a junior officer making unauthorized decisions. This is the Army's highest-ranking officer endorsing genocide as official policy. Within weeks, other commanders respond to this implicit directive. Field Marshal Erich von Manstein, commanding 11th Army in Crimea, issues his own order on November 20th, stating that the Jewish Bolshevik system must be exterminated and that soldiers must show understanding for the harsh atonement of Jewry. Field Marshal Hermann Hoth issues similar directives. Field Marshal Georg von Kukler's orders emphasize harsh treatment of civilians and cooperation with SS security operations. The pattern is clear. Reichenau's voluntary initiative becomes Wehrmacht-wide policy. The institutional mechanisms that transformed Reichenau's criminal order into general Wehrmacht policy reveal how thoroughly the German military had been Nazified by 1941. When Brauchitsch distributes Reichenau's order, he is not simply sharing information but establishing doctrine. Wehrmacht staff officers at Army High Command study the order, analyze its language, and incorporate its principles into official directives about occupation, policy, and treatment of civilians. Training materials for officers being assigned to Eastern Front duties include emphasis on ideological warfare and harsh treatment of racial enemies. Personnel evaluations for officers begin including assessments of ideological reliability alongside traditional military competence. Promotions increasingly favour officers who demonstrate enthusiasm for Nazi goals. The institutional culture shifts from Prussian military professionalism, with its emphasis on apolitical service and restraint, toward Nazi military activism that views warfare as tool for racial transformation. Reichenau's career and his orders provide the template for this transformation. Adolf Hitler's personal response to Reichenau's Severity Order illuminates why Wehrmacht leadership embraced rather than resisted criminal policies. When Hitler reads the order in late October 1941, he is delighted and orders even wider distribution. He tells subordinates that Reichenau represents the type of commander Germany needs, combining military competence with ideological conviction. This sends clear signals through the Wehrmacht officer corps. Commanders who issue orders like Reichenau's will be rewarded and promoted, while commanders who maintain traditional restraint will be viewed with suspicion. Career incentives align with criminal conduct. Officers ambitious for promotion understand that demonstrating ideological zeal path to advancement. This creates a perverse dynamic where criminality becomes professional advantage. Some officers issue harsh orders because they genuinely believe in Nazi ideology. Others do so for careerist reasons, calculating that ideological performance will benefit their careers. The result is the same: Wehrmacht participation in genocide. The scale of Wehrmacht crimes on the Eastern Front, documented through captured German records and Soviet investigations, demonstrates that Reichenau's approach was not exceptional but typical. Wehrmacht forces directly participated in mass murder of an estimated 1 to 2 million Jews through shootings, starvation, and cooperation with SS Einsatzgruppen. Anti-partisan operations, conducted by Wehrmacht units often with only nominal SS involvement, killed approximately 500,000 Soviet civilians, the majority of whom were not actually partisans but civilians caught in reprisal operations. Wehrmacht mistreatment of Soviet prisoners of war resulted in deaths of approximately 3.3 million of the 5.7 million Soviet POWs captured, a death rate of 57% that constitutes deliberate mass murder through starvation, exposure, and execution. The siege of Leningrad, conducted primarily by Wehrmacht forces through artillery bombardment and deliberate starvation, killed over 1 million civilians. These crimes were not committed by SS or Nazi party formations operating independently of military authority, but by Wehrmacht units following orders issued by Wehrmacht commanders. The legal and moral implications of this criminality were addressed at Nuremberg, though imperfectly. The International Military Tribunal considered whether to indict the German General Staff and High Command as criminal organizations, which would have made membership itself evidence of guilt. Prosecutors presented extensive evidence, including Reichenau's Severity Order and similar directives from other commanders, proving systematic Wehrmacht participation in war crimes and crimes against humanity. The tribunal ultimately declined to declare the General Staff a criminal organization, ruling that it was not a cohesive entity but rather a collection of individuals who must be judged separately. This decision was controversial and has been criticized by historians as too lenient. However, subsequent trials did prosecute individual Wehrmacht commanders. The High Command trial of 1947 to 1948 tried 14 senior Wehrmacht officers, convicting 11 of war crimes. Evidence presented included orders similar to Reichenau's, demonstrating patterns of criminal conduct across multiple armies and commanders. Field Marshal Erich von Manstein's trial, conducted by British military court in 1949, directly addressed the question of Wehrmacht commanders' responsibility for issuing orders similar to Reichenau's von Manstein's November 1941 order, closely modelled on Reichenau's Severity Order, was presented as evidence of criminal conduct. Von Manstein's defence argued that he was following orders from higher authority and that his language was less extreme than Reichenau's. The prosecution demonstrated that von Manstein, like Reichenau, had voluntarily exceeded what was ordered and had personally decided to issue criminal directives. Von Manstein was convicted on charges including responsibility for mass killings in his operational area and sentenced to 18 years imprisonment, later reduced. He served only 4 years before release in 1953. The leniency of his sentence reflects Cold War politics and Western desire to rehabilitate Wehrmacht officers for potential service against the Soviet Union. Justice was partial at best. The post-war emergence of the clean Wehrmacht myth represents a coordinated effort to obscure the military's criminal record. Beginning in the late 1940s and continuing through the 1960s, former Wehrmacht officers published memoirs and histories portraying the German military as a professional organization that fought honorably while Nazi political leadership committed crimes. These accounts systematically minimized or denied Wehrmacht participation in atrocities. Reichenau, conveniently dead and unable to contradict these narratives, was characterized as an exceptional case, a Nazi political general unlike the supposedly apolitical professional officers who made up most of the Wehrmacht leadership. Former Chief of Staff Franz Halder, in his post-war writings, defended Reichenau as a talented commander whose ideological enthusiasm was regrettable but whose military contributions were valuable. This rehabilitation of Reichenau's military reputation, while downplaying his criminality, served the broader project of defending Wehrmacht's honor. The historical truth, established through decades of scholarship by German and international historians, directly contradicts the clean Wehrmacht myth. The German military was institutionally complicit in Nazi crimes from the beginning. Wehrmacht leaders participated in planning aggressive wars prohibited by international law. They accepted and implemented criminal orders like the Commissar Order and Barbarossa Decree. They issued their own criminal orders, as Reichenau did, exceeding what Nazi political leadership required. They provided essential support to SS mass murder operations. They committed their own atrocities in anti-partisan operations and treatment of prisoners and civilians. Individual soldiers and officers varied in their degree of participation, from enthusiastic perpetrators to reluctant followers to rare resistors, but the institution itself was deeply implicated. Reichenau's significance is not that he was exceptional, but that he was representative of Wehrmacht leadership that chose collaboration with genocide. The German military's path to criminality offers lessons relevant beyond World War II. Professional military institutions can be corrupted by totalitarian regimes through combination of ideological indoctrination, career incentives that reward criminality, orders that gradually escalate from questionable to clearly criminal, and institutional culture that prioritizes obedience over moral judgment. The Prussian General Staff had been considered one of history's most professional military institutions, yet it became instrument of genocide within a decade of Nazi rule. This transformation was not inevitable, but resulted from choices made by individual officers like Reichenau, who decided that professional competence could and should serve ideological goals regardless of moral constraints. Modern military education in Germany and elsewhere studies Wehrmacht criminality specifically to understand how professional ethics can be preserved even under pressure from authoritarian political leadership. The question of what would have happened if more Wehrmacht commanders had refused criminal orders like Reichenau's Severity Order is historically important. Some commanders did refuse or limit their compliance with such orders, demonstrating that resistance was possible. General Johannes Blaskowitz filed formal protests about SS atrocities in Poland in 1939, documenting crimes and arguing they violated military honor. He was removed from command for his protests but was not executed or imprisoned, suggesting that principled resistance carried career consequences but not lethal risks. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, despite his service to the Nazi regime, refused to implement Hitler's commando order directing execution of captured Allied special forces, and no action was taken against him for this refusal. These examples prove that Wehrmacht officers could refuse criminal orders and that doing so was a moral choice available to commanders like Reichenau. They chose not to refuse because they agreed with the criminal policies, not because refusal was impossible. The General Staff's guilty secret is that its criminality was voluntary. September 1939. Łódź, Poland. Wehrmacht General Johannes Blaskowitz, commanding 8th Army during the Polish campaign, receives reports from subordinates describing SS Einsatzgruppen massacres of Polish civilians in his operational area. Unlike Reichenau, who facilitates such operations, Blaskowitz is horrified. He begins documenting the atrocities in detailed memoranda, describing specific incidents with dates, locations, and victim numbers. On November 18, 1939, he submits a formal complaint to Commander-in-Chief von Brauchitsch, stating, "The attitude of the troops towards the SS and police alternates between abhorrence and hatred. Every soldier feels disgusted and repelled by these crimes which are being perpetrated in Poland by nationals of the Reich and representatives of the state authority." Blaskowitz files 5 separate memoranda through February 1940, meticulously documenting SS crimes and arguing that Wehrmacht cooperation with such atrocities destroys military discipline and honor. His reward is removal from command in May 1940. But he is not imprisoned, not executed, not even forced into retirement. He receives other, less prominent commands and survives the war. His example proves that protest was possible and that the consequences, while professionally damaging, were not lethal. The contrast between Blaskowitz's response to atrocities in Poland and Reichenau's response to similar crimes illuminates the role of individual moral choice. Both generals commanded armies during Polish campaign. Both operated in areas where SS Einsatzgruppen committed mass murder. Both received reports about killings, and both had authority to facilitate or obstruct SS operations. Blaskowitz chose to protest, document, and resist. Reichenau chose to cooperate, justify, and enable. These were moral choices, not inevitable responses to circumstances. The orders from Wehrmacht High Command and from Hitler were ambiguous enough to allow commanders some discretion in implementation. Blaskowitz used that discretion to limit Wehrmacht involvement and to place his objections on record. Reichenau used that discretion to maximize Wehrmacht cooperation with SS crimes. Both men knew what was happening. Both understood the moral implications. They simply made different choices about whether military honor required resistance to criminal policies. Field Marshal Wilhelm Ritter von Lieb's experience on the Eastern Front demonstrates another form of resistance, more limited than Blaskowitz's but still significant. Von Lieb commanded Army Group North during the opening phases of Barbarossa, including operations toward Leningrad. His private diary, seized after the war and used in evidence at Nuremberg, reveals his internal struggle with criminal orders. He describes the Commissar order as senseless and contrary to military tradition. He expresses disgust at SS killings in his operational area. Yet he does not refuse to implement criminal orders entirely. He issues modified versions of orders like Reichenau's Severity Order, using less extreme language but still directing harsh treatment of civilians and cooperation with SS security operations. His resistance is partial, constrained by his sense of duty to follow orders even when he disagrees with them. Von Lieb's case shows the tragic inadequacy of private moral qualms without public resistance. He knew the orders were wrong but implemented them anyway, making him complicit despite his personal reservations. The July 20th, 1944, assassination plot against Hitler represents the most dramatic form of Wehrmacht resistance, though it came far too late to prevent most Nazi crimes. The conspiracy included several dozen Wehrmacht officers, among them Colonel Klaus von Stauffenberg, who planted the bomb, General Ludwig Beck, who was to lead the post-Hitler government, and Field Marshal Erwin von Witzleben, who was designated to command the Wehrmacht after Hitler's overthrow. These conspirators understood that Nazi regime was leading Germany to catastrophe and that Hitler must be removed by force. Their plot nearly succeeded. The bomb exploded in Hitler's headquarters, but Hitler survived with minor injuries. The conspirators were hunted down, tortured, and executed in horrible ways. Approximately 200 people were killed in the subsequent purges, including military officers, civilians, and even some who had not been directly involved but were suspected of disloyalty. The July 20th plotters demonstrated ultimate form of resistance, willingness to commit treason and risk death to stop Hitler. Significantly, Reichenau was never associated with any resistance network. His loyalty to Hitler was absolute until his death. General Alexander von Falkenhausen's tenure as military governor of Belgium, succeeding Reichenau in that role, provides instructive contrast in how different commanders implemented occupation policy. Von Falkenhausen was a conservative aristocrat with no enthusiasm for Nazi ideology, though he served the regime professionally. His occupation policies were significantly less harsh than Reichenau's. He attempted to maintain correct relations with Belgian civilian authorities, avoided excessive reprisals for resistance activities, and secretly protected some Belgian Jews from deportation by warning them of planned SS actions or by slow-walking Wehrmacht cooperation with deportation orders. These protective actions were limited and could not prevent the Holocaust in Belgium, but they saved some lives. Von Falkenhausen was eventually arrested after the July 20th plot, not because he participated in it, but because the Gestapo discovered his contacts with resistance circles. He survived this war in a concentration camp and was later tried by Belgian courts, where testimony about his protective actions resulted in relatively lenient sentence. His example demonstrates that even within constraints of military occupation, individual commanders could choose more or less brutal policies. The question arises, what distinguished resistors like Blaskowitz from collaborators like Reichenau? Both were professional officers from similar backgrounds, both educated in same military academies, both steeped in Prussian military tradition. Several factors appear relevant. First, religious faith. Officers who maintained strong Christian convictions were more likely to protest Nazi crimes, while officers like Reichenau, who had abandoned traditional religion in favour of Nazi ideology, were more likely to embrace criminal policies. Second, generational differences. Younger officers who came of age after World War I were more susceptible to Nazi ideology, while older officers who remembered pre-Nazi Germany were more likely to maintain traditional values. Third, career ambition. Officers who sought rapid advancement understood that ideological enthusiasm was rewarded, while officers content with slower career progression could afford to maintain independence. Fourth, and most fundamentally, individual moral character. Some officers possessed conscience that could not be silenced by ideology, orders, or career considerations, while others were willing to participate in any crime if it served their advancement or their cause. The courage required for military resistance to Hitler's regime should not be underestimated. Officers who protested criminal orders faced serious risks: removal from command, blocked promotions, assignment to dangerous posts, investigation by Gestapo, even execution for treason. These risks increased as the war continued and Hitler became more paranoid about military loyalty, yet the risks were not as absolute as post-war memoirs sometimes claimed. Blaskowitz was not executed for his protests. Von Lieb retired without persecution despite his known reservations. Many officers who expressed private doubts survived the war without serious consequences. The mythology that any resistance meant certain death served post-war apologetics by implying that officers had no choice but to obey. The reality is more complex. Resistance carried risks but was possible, and the consequences varied depending on timing, circumstances, and how openly one resisted. Officers like Reichenau did not cooperate with genocide because they had no choice, but because they chose to cooperate. The structural factors that made Wehrmacht resistance difficult but not impossible include Hitler's personal authority over military appointments, the oath of loyalty. Wehrmacht officers swore to Hitler personally rather than to constitution or nation, and the decentralized nature of Wehrmacht command, which made coordinated resistance difficult. Hitler personally approved all general officer appointments and promotions, giving him leverage to reward loyalists and punish doubters. The personal oath of loyalty, sworn by all officers after Hindenburg's death in 1934, created psychological barrier to resistance for officers who took oaths seriously. The Wehrmacht's operational structure, with multiple army groups and armies reporting through separate chains of command, prevented easy coordination among potentially dissenting commanders. Yet none of these factors made resistance impossible. They made it difficult, risky, and requiring courage. Officers like Reichenau lacked the moral courage to resist because they did not want to resist. They believed in what they were doing. The tragic inadequacy of Wehrmacht resistance efforts is that they came too late and remained too limited. By the time of the July 20th plot in 1944, Nazi Germany had already murdered millions of Jews, millions of Soviet civilians and POWs, and hundreds of thousands of others. Wehrmacht forces had participated extensively in these crimes. Removing Hitler in 1944 could not undo the genocide already committed. What was needed was resistance in the late 1930s or early 1940s, when Nazi criminal policies were being established, but before they had produced their full catastrophe. A few officers like Blaskowitz attempted such early resistance but were too isolated to be effective. Most officers, including those who later joined resistance efforts, cooperated with criminal policies during the crucial early years. Reichenau represents the opposite trajectory: enthusiastic collaboration from the beginning, never wavering, dying before he could be held accountable. The generals who refused proved that resistance was possible. The generals who collaborated, like Reichenau, proved that complicity was a choice. The moral calculus of military obedience under criminal regime remains relevant to modern, professional military ethics. Military discipline requires obedience to lawful orders, but it also requires refusal of manifestly illegal orders. The challenge is determining when orders cross the line from questionable to criminal, and whether individual officers have duty to refuse even at cost to their careers or lives. Modern military law, in democratic nations, generally holds that soldiers must refuse orders to commit war crimes, even orders from superior officers, and that following orders is not a defense against war crimes prosecution. This principle was established at Nuremberg partly in response to Wehrmacht officers' defense that they were merely following Hitler's orders. Reichenau's case demonstrates why this defense must be rejected. He did not merely follow orders, but anticipated, exceeded, and enthusiastically implemented criminal policies. The generals who refused, however imperfectly, demonstrate that moral agency remained possible even in Wehrmacht. Their examples shame the collaborators and refute claims that resistance was impossible. March 1942. 2 months after Reichenau's death, Wehrmacht operations in occupied Soviet territories continue with undiminished brutality. The patterns Reichenau established, the cooperation between Wehrmacht and SS in genocide, the starvation of prisoners and civilians, the savage reprisals against partisan activity, all these continue and intensify. New commanders proved that Reichenau's criminality was not unique to his personality but reflected Wehrmacht institutional culture. Field Marshal von Manstein, whose November 1941 order closely mirrored Reichenau's Severity Order, implements systematic starvation policy in Crimea during siege of Sevastopol. Approximately 40,000 Soviet civilians in Simferopol and other Crimean cities are denied food, resulting in mass death by hunger and disease. Wehrmacht anti-partisan operations throughout Ukraine, Belarus, and Russia escalate in lethality. Villages suspected of supporting partisans are burned, their populations executed. Men of military age are killed automatically on suspicion of being partisan fighters. Women and children are not spared. Entire communities are exterminated. The Eastern Front, after Reichenau, becomes hell on earth. The expansion of the Holocaust in 1942 proceeds with Wehrmacht complicity at every stage. The Wannsee Conference of January 1942 formalizes the final solution, the systematic murder of all European Jews. Implementation requires Wehrmacht cooperation, providing transportation for deportation trains, securing ghettos where Jews are concentrated before murder, guarding routes to death camps, permitting SS death squad operations in Wehrmacht operational areas. Wehrmacht commanders, following precedents Reichenau established, provide this cooperation routinely. The killing methods evolve from mass shootings, which Einsatzgruppen used extensively in 1941, toward industrialized murder in death camps like Auschwitz-Birkenau, Treblinka, and Sobibor. These camps operate in occupied Poland territory under Wehrmacht military governance. The Wehrmacht does not run the death camps. That is an SS responsibility. But Wehrmacht units provide security for surrounding areas, investigate and suppress escapes, and generally ensure the camps can operate without interference. Summer 1942 brings Germany's final major offensive on the Eastern Front, Operation Blue, driving toward Caucasus oil fields and Stalingrad. As Wehrmacht forces advance, the pattern of mass murder continues. Einsatzgruppen follow advancing armies, systematically killing Jewish populations in newly captured territories. The city of Rostov-on-Don, captured by Wehrmacht forces in July, sees its Jewish population of approximately 27,000 murdered within weeks. Krasnodar, captured in August, witnesses similar massacre. Wehrmacht forces secure these cities militarily, then turn them over to SS for security operations, a euphemism for mass murder. The Wehrmacht's role is essential. SS units lack sufficient strength to control territory and conduct murder operations simultaneously. Wehrmacht provides territorial control, allowing SS to focus on killing. This is deliberate division of labor, not accidental coincidence. Anti-partisan warfare on the Eastern Front escalates into genocidal operations far exceeding any legitimate military necessity. German forces face genuine partisan resistance. Soviet soldiers bypassed in 1941 formed guerrilla groups that attack supply lines, railways, and isolated German units. Soviet political authorities organize and supply these partisans, making them legitimate military threat requiring countermeasures. But Wehrmacht anti-partisan operations, conducted under doctrine established partly by Reichenau's orders, make no meaningful distinction between armed partisans and civilian populations. The operating assumption is that any Soviet civilian in partisan-affected areas is either a partisan fighter, a partisan supporter, or a potential partisan recruit. Therefore, all are enemies who can be killed. Villages in partisan areas are surrounded by Wehrmacht troops. All inhabitants are assembled. Military-age males are shot immediately. Women and children are either shot or deported to Germany as forced labor. This is not counterinsurgency. This is mass murder under guise of security operations. Specific anti-partisan operations demonstrate the systematic nature of Wehrmacht crimes. Operation Hamburg, conducted in Belarus in December 1942, results in the deaths of approximately 5,000 civilians, destruction of 70 villages, and deportation of thousands more to forced labor. Official German reports describe these casualties as partisans and partisan suspects eliminated, but captured documents and survivor testimonies reveal that most victims were civilians. Operation Cottbus, conducted in Belarus in June 1943, claims to have killed over 5,000 partisans while suffering only German casualties of approximately 80 men. Such disproportionate casualty ratios indicate that most victims were unarmed civilians rather than armed fighters. Wehrmacht after-action reports from anti-partisan operations routinely list thousands of enemies killed while capturing only dozens of weapons, mathematical impossibility if victims were actually armed partisans. The evidence proves these were murder operations, not legitimate military actions. The siege of Leningrad represents Wehrmacht criminality at its most sustained and lethal. Wehrmacht forces, primarily Army Group North, surround Leningrad in September 1941 and maintain the siege until January 1944, 872 days. The siege is deliberately designed to starve the city's population. Wehrmacht artillery and air bombardment target civilian areas, not just military installations. Supply routes into the city are cut and attacked continuously. The stated German policy is to allow the city's population to starve rather than expending German casualties assaulting prepared defences. Hitler explicitly orders that no surrender will be accepted because feeding Leningrad's population would strain German resources. The result is mass death. Approximately 1 million civilians die during the siege, primarily from starvation and related diseases. This is not accidental collateral damage, but deliberate starvation as weapon of war. Wehrmacht forces execute this policy daily for over 2 years. Reichenau was not involved in Leningrad's siege, but his ideological framework, his willingness to use starvation as weapon, established precedents that other Wehrmacht commanders followed. Soviet prisoners of war suffer catastrophically under Wehrmacht custody throughout the war, with death toll peaking in winter, 1941 to 1942, but continuing through 1945. Of approximately 5.7 million Soviet POWs captured by Wehrmacht, approximately 3.3 million die in German custody, a death rate of 57%. This contrasts with Western Allied POWs held by Germany, whose death rate was approximately 3.5%. The difference is not accidental, but reflects deliberate policy. Reichenau's Severity Order explicitly directed that Soviet POWs and civilians should be denied food. This policy was implemented Wehrmacht-wide. Soviet prisoners are held in open-air camps with no shelter, given starvation rations averaging around 700 calories per day when guards bother to feed them at all, provided no medical care, and subjected to summary execution for minor infractions. Prisoners die en masse from starvation, exposure, typhus, and other diseases. Those who survive are often worked to death as forced labour. This is mass murder by deliberate neglect, a crime against humanity for which Wehrmacht bears direct responsibility. The psychological impact on Wehrmacht soldiers of participating in or witnessing these crimes varied tremendously. Some soldiers became brutalised, their consciences seared by continuous exposure to atrocity until they viewed murder as normal. Photographs exist of Wehrmacht soldiers watching or even participating in executions, their faces showing boredom or amusement rather than horror. Other soldiers maintained moral awareness that what they were witnessing was wrong but felt powerless to stop it and compromised by not protesting. Letters home, particularly in 1941 and 42, before censorship tightened, contain references to atrocities that disturb letter writers, but that they feel unable to prevent. A minority of soldiers actively resisted by refusing to participate in killings when ordered, by warning intended victims, or by documenting crimes with intention of future accountability. These resistors were rare and took serious risks. The Wehrmacht as institution did nothing to protect or encourage such moral resistance. Instead, institutional culture rewarded brutality and punished compassion. The question of whether Wehrmacht could have fought the Eastern Front War without committing systematic atrocities is important. Partisan warfare and security operations in hostile occupied territory present legitimate military challenges requiring forceful responses. But there is an enormous moral and legal difference between legitimate counterinsurgency operations that discriminate between combatants and civilians, and genocidal operations that treat entire populations as enemies. Wehrmacht could have fought partisans while adhering to laws of war, treating captured partisans as POWs rather than executing them, distinguishing between armed fighters and civilian populations, using proportional force, and respecting civilian rights. Some Wehrmacht units did operate this way, at least some of the time, proving that alternative approaches were possible. But Wehrmacht institutional policy, established partly through orders like Reichenau's, rejected restraint in favour of unlimited violence. The choice to wage war of extermination rather than war constrained by laws and ethics was Wehrmacht leadership's decision. Reichenau was among the first and most enthusiastic advocates of this criminal approach. By 1943, as strategic situation turns decisively against Germany, Wehrmacht atrocities, if anything, intensify. Retreating Wehrmacht units implement scorched earth policies, destroying infrastructure, burning villages, and murdering civilians to deny resources to advancing Soviet forces. These measures go far beyond legitimate military necessity, deliberately targeting civilian populations for retribution and terror. The moral trajectory of the Wehrmacht on the Eastern Front is descent into complete barbarism, from initial criminal orders in 1941 through sustained genocide in 1942 to desperate savagery in retreat from 1943 to 1945. Reichenau's death in January 1942 places him midway through this descent. He helped establish the patterns of criminality that would continue and intensify after his death. He did not live to face the consequences of what he had helped create. But his legacy is written in the deaths of millions of Soviet citizens and prisoners murdered by Wehrmacht forces following doctrines he helped establish. The aristocrat who chose the swastika died believing he had served Germany well. History judges that he served only death. November 20, 1945. Courtroom 600 at the Palace of Justice, Nuremberg. The International Military Tribunal opens proceedings against 24 major Nazi war criminals, including Hermann Göring, Wilhelm Keitel, and other leaders of Hitler's regime. The prosecution's case includes extensive evidence of Wehrmacht crimes on the Eastern Front. British prosecutor Sir Hartley Shawcross presents captured German documents to the court, including orders from Wehrmacht commanders directing cooperation with genocide. Among these documents is Walther von Reichenau's Severity Order of October 10th, 1941. Shawcross reads portions of the order aloud in court, his voice carefully neutral as he recites Reichenau's command that soldiers show understanding for harsh punishment of Jewry and that they act as carriers of ruthless national ideology. The judges listen in silence. The defendants in the dock shift uncomfortably. Field Marshal Keitel, representing Wehrmacht leadership, will later testify that orders like Reichenau's were exceptional. The documentary evidence proves otherwise, but Reichenau himself is not in the dock. He is 3 years dead, beyond reach of justice. The prosecutors at Nuremberg face fundamental challenge: how to assign individual criminal responsibility within a military hierarchy where everyone claims to have been following orders from superiors. The defense strategy, articulated most clearly by Field Marshal Keitel and General Alfred Jodl, is that Wehrmacht leaders were professional soldiers following orders from Hitler and Nazi political leadership, that they personally opposed criminal policies but could not refuse orders without being shot for disobedience, and that true responsibility lies with Nazi party leaders like Hitler, Himmler, and Heydrich, who conceived and ordered the criminal policies. This defense is partially undermined by officers like Reichenau, who voluntarily exceeded orders and issued criminal directives without being commanded to do so. Reichenau's Severity Order is introduced as evidence precisely because it demonstrates that Wehrmacht criminality was voluntary, not merely obedience to orders. If Reichenau had survived to face trial, his defense would have been much weaker than other Wehrmacht officers because his own orders prove his voluntary participation in genocide. The tribunal's decision regarding the German General Staff and High Command reflects the complexity of assigning collective responsibility. The prosecution argues that the General Staff should be declared a criminal organisation, making membership itself evidence of guilt. Evidence presented includes criminal orders from multiple Wehrmacht commanders, systematic Wehrmacht cooperation with SS murder operations, and Wehrmacht's role in planning and executing aggressive wars. The defence argues that the General Staff was not a cohesive organisation, but rather a functional grouping of officers without formal membership or shared ideology. On October 1st, 1946, the tribunal rules that the General Staff and High Command will not be declared criminal organisations because they lack the organisational structure necessary for such designation. However, the tribunal explicitly states that many General Staff members are guilty of war crimes and crimes against humanity, and that these individuals can and should be prosecuted. This ruling opens the door for subsequent trials of Wehrmacht officers while rejecting collective guilt. The High Command trial, formerly known as United States versus Wilhelm von Lieb et al., held from December 1947 to October 1948, directly addresses Wehrmacht criminal responsibility. 14 senior Wehrmacht officers are tried, including 3 field marshals. The charges include crimes against humanity, war crimes, murder, and waging aggressive war. Evidence presented includes orders similar to Reichenau's from multiple defendants. Field Marshal von Lieb's diary entries questioning criminal orders are presented, but prosecutors demonstrate that he implemented the orders despite his private doubts. Field Marshal Hermann Hoth is charged with issuing orders directing harsh treatment of Soviet civilians. General Hans Reinhardt faces charges related to anti-partisan operations that killed thousands of civilians. The verdicts are mixed. 11 of 14 defendants are convicted, receiving sentences ranging from time served to 20 years imprisonment. 3 are acquitted. The convicted officers serve only portions of their sentences before release in the early 1950s, freed due to Cold War considerations and clemency decisions. The hypothetical trial of Walther von Reichenau, had he survived the war, provides insight into how justice system would have evaluated his conduct. The charges would certainly have included crimes against humanity for his Severity Order directing Wehrmacht participation in genocide, war crimes for ordering starvation of Soviet POWs and civilians, murder for deaths resulting from his orders, and possibly planning aggressive war for his role in Poland and France campaigns. The prosecution's evidence would be overwhelming. His written orders, directing criminal acts, testimony from subordinates about implementation of these orders, documentary evidence of killings and starvation in 6th Army's operational area, and testimony from survivors. His defence would likely follow the pattern of other Wehrmacht officers, claiming he was following orders from Hitler and Wehrmacht High Command, arguing that harsh measures were militarily necessary to deal with partisan threats and hostile populations, asserting that he personally prevented even worse atrocities by SS forces. This defence would be weak, because his Severity Order demonstrates he exceeded orders from higher authority, because partisan activity cannot justify genocide, and because no evidence suggests he restrained SS operations. The verdict in a hypothetical Reichenau trial would almost certainly be guilty on most or all charges. His Severity Order alone constitutes documentary proof of ordering crimes against humanity. The fact that Hitler praised and distributed the order does not exonerate Reichenau. It proves his criminal responsibility because he voluntarily issued the order before being directed to do so. The deaths resulting from starvation policies he ordered could be proven through statistical analysis of POW death rates in 6th Army's custody compared to Wehrmacht-wide averages and compared to death rates of Western Allied POWs. Witness testimony from Soviet survivors about Wehrmacht cooperation with Einsatzgruppen killings would establish direct causal connection between Reichenau's orders and specific murders. Based on sentences given to comparable Wehrmacht commanders in the High Command trial, Reichenau would likely have received a sentence of 15 to 20 years imprisonment if convicted only on Eastern Front crimes, or possibly death penalty if convicted on all charges including aggressive war and crimes in Poland. The legal standard applied at Nuremberg for evaluating following orders defence is relevant to Reichenau's case. The tribunal established that following orders is not an absolute defence but may be considered in mitigation of sentence. The key question is whether the defendant had moral choice, whether he knew or should have known that the orders were criminal, and whether he could have refused without facing execution. In Reichenau's case, the following orders defence is inapplicable because his criminal orders were voluntary initiatives, not implementations of directives from superiors. The moral choice question is resolved against him because his orders explicitly direct genocide and starvation, acts that any reasonable person would recognise as criminal. The question of whether he could have refused is irrelevant because he was not ordered to issue the Severity Order, he chose to issue it. Under Nuremberg standards, Reichenau would bear full individual criminal responsibility for his acts. The injustice of Reichenau's death before facing trial extends beyond his personal escape from accountability. His death allowed post-war Wehrmacht apologists to construct false narratives about his character and conduct. Without Reichenau alive to be prosecuted, convicted, and held accountable, defenders of Wehrmacht honor could claim he was exceptional case, a Nazi political general, unlike the supposedly professional officers who constituted most of Wehrmacht leadership. This false distinction between Nazi generals, like Reichenau, and professional generals who supposedly maintained traditional military ethics has been thoroughly debunked by historical scholarship, but it persisted for decades in popular consciousness. If Reichenau had been tried, convicted, and executed alongside other Nazi war criminals, the clean Wehrmacht myth would have been harder to sustain. His trial would have demonstrated continuity between Nazi ideology and Wehrmacht criminality in ways that abstract documentary evidence could not convey as powerfully. The victims of Reichenau's crimes never received justice. The tens of thousands of Soviet civilians and POWs who died from starvation he ordered, the Jews murdered with Wehrmacht cooperation, he facilitated the Polish civilians killed with his support in 1939. None of them saw their murderer face accountability. Reichenau died in bed, unconscious and pain-free, attended by doctors trying to save him, mourned as hero by Nazi regime. His victims died in ditches, in ravines, in frozen fields, in starvation camps, murdered or abandoned to death by forces following his orders. This disparity between his comfortable death and their horrific deaths compounds the moral outrage of his crimes. Justice demands that criminals face consequences for their acts. Reichenau faced no consequences. He escaped justice through death, and that escape represents profound moral failure of history. The trials that never happened for Reichenau mean that his crimes have never been fully acknowledged, his victims never vindicated, and the full extent of his guilt never officially established by court judgment. History must serve as substitute for the justice that death denied. May 1952. A ceremony at a West German military cemetery where Wehrmacht soldiers killed on the Eastern Front are being reburied with military honours. Among the graves is Reichenau's, transferred from his original burial site in Berlin. The ceremony is attended by former Wehrmacht officers, now prominent in West German government and society. Speeches praise the fallen soldiers' service and sacrifice. No mention is made of Wehrmacht war crimes. No reference to genocide, starvation policies, or mass murder of civilians. The soldiers are portrayed as patriots who fought bravely for Germany, unfortunate victims of a lost war. Reichenau is eulogized as talented commander whose early death deprived Germany of needed military leadership. A former staff officer speaks of Reichenau's professionalism and courage. The speech does not mention his Severity Order, his cooperation with Holocaust, his criminal conduct. This is the beginning of the clean Wehrmacht myth in post-war Germany, a deliberate forgetting of military crimes in favour of comforting narratives about honour and duty. The memory wars over Wehrmacht guilt have begun, and they will last for decades. The political and social context of 1950s West Germany explains why the clean Wehrmacht myth flourished despite documentary evidence of Wehrmacht criminality. West Germany needed to rearm to join NATO and contribute to Western defence against Soviet Union. This required rehabilitating the Wehrmacht's reputation to make military service acceptable in democratic society. Millions of West German citizens were Wehrmacht veterans, and their votes mattered to democratic politicians. Acknowledging Wehrmacht's criminal conduct would implicate these millions of ordinary Germans in genocide, creating unbearable cognitive dissonance for society, trying to rebuild. Former Wehrmacht officers held prominent positions in West German government, military, and business. They had strong incentives to defend Wehrmacht's honour and their personal reputations. The result was coordinated effort to portray Wehrmacht as professional military force that fought honourably while Nazi political leadership committed crimes. Reichenau fit awkwardly into this narrative because his orders were so explicitly criminal. So he was characterised as exceptional case, a political general, unlike the supposedly apolitical professionals who made up most of Wehrmacht. The memoirs published by former Wehrmacht commanders in 1950s and 60s systematically minimized or denied Wehrmacht criminality. Franz Halder, former chief of staff, published memoirs portraying Wehrmacht leadership as professional soldiers who opposed Hitler's worst excesses but could not refuse orders without being shot. Erich von Manstein published Lost Victories, defending his conduct, and claiming Wehrmacht fought cleanly while SS committed crimes. Heinz Guderian's memoirs focus entirely on tactical and operational matters, never addressing Wehrmacht participation in genocide. These memoirs share common characteristics. They emphasize military professionalism, they claim Wehrmacht opposed criminal orders but had no choice but to obey, they attribute all crimes to SS or Nazi Party organizations, and they portray Wehrmacht generals as tragic figures caught between duty to nation and horror at regime's criminality. Reichenau appears in these memoirs as a talented tactician whose ideological enthusiasm was regrettable but whose military competence was valuable. His criminal orders are minimized or explained as harsh measures required by partisan warfare and brutal Eastern Front conditions. The 1960s and 70s brought first serious challenges to the clean Wehrmacht myth from within Germany. A new generation of German historians, many born during or after the war, began examining captured German documents with critical eyes. Historians like Manfred Messerschmitt and Christian Streit published studies demonstrating Wehrmacht's systematic participation in war crimes and genocide. Their work was initially controversial and faced resistance from veterans organisations and conservative politicians who accused them of defaming Germany and dishonouring fallen soldiers. But the documentary evidence was overwhelming. Captured Wehrmacht orders directing cooperation with genocide, after-action reports documenting mass killings, statistical analyses of POW death rates, testimony from survivors and from Wehrmacht soldiers with troubled consciences, all proved that Wehrmacht crimes were systematic rather than exceptional. Reichenau's Severity Order became central to this revisionist scholarship precisely because it so clearly demonstrated voluntary Wehrmacht participation in genocide. The Wehrmacht exhibition of 1995 brought controversy over Wehrmacht criminality into mainstream German public consciousness. The exhibition, titled War of Annihilation, Crimes of the Wehrmacht, 1941 to 1944, presented photographs, documents, and testimony demonstrating Wehrmacht's role in genocide and mass murder. The exhibition travelled to 33 German and Austrian cities, attracting over 1.2 million visitors. It also attracted intense controversy, protests, vandalism, bomb threats from neo-Nazis and Wehrmacht veterans organisations who insisted the exhibition dishonoured German soldiers. Some photographs in the original exhibition were later found to be misattributed, feeding criticism, but the exhibition's core thesis that Wehrmacht systematically participated in criminal acts was supported by overwhelming evidence. A revised exhibition opened in 2001, incorporating scholarly critiques while maintaining documentation of Wehrmacht crimes. The public debate sparked by the exhibition represented a crucial turning point in German historical memory, forcing Germans to confront military's criminal past rather than maintaining comfortable myth of clean Wehrmacht. The official German government acknowledgement of Wehrmacht criminality came gradually and incompletely. The West German government of the 1950s and 60s avoided addressing Wehrmacht crimes, focusing instead on SS and Nazi Party criminality. This began changing in the 1980s and 90s, as archival research made denial impossible. A German Defense Ministry commission in 2000 explicitly acknowledged Wehrmacht's systematic participation in war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide. The commission's report stated that Wehrmacht was involved in the National Socialist crimes and that knowledge of the crimes and participation in them extended from the highest levels of command down to the individual soldier. Modern German military education includes mandatory instruction on Wehrmacht criminality as cautionary lesson about military ethics under totalitarian regimes. Reichenau is presented in this education as example of how professional military competence can serve evil ends when divorced from moral constraints. German military officers today study his Severity Order as exemplar of how criminal orders should be recognised and refused. The persistence of the clean Wehrmacht myth in popular culture despite scholarly consensus about Wehrmacht criminality demonstrates the difficulty of changing collective memory. Movies, novels, and popular histories continued portraying Wehrmacht soldiers as honourable fighters until well into the 2000s. The myth persists partly because it is more comfortable than truth. Acknowledging that millions of ordinary German soldiers participated in or witnessed genocide forces confrontation with how normal people become complicit in extraordinary evil. The myth persists partly because Wehrmacht veterans and their families defended their reputations and honour. And the myth persists partly because human psychology prefers simple narratives of good and evil to complex realities of complicity and moral compromise. Reichenau's historical reputation illustrates this dynamic. He is easier to dismiss as exceptional Nazi fanatic than to acknowledge as representative of Wehrmacht command culture. But honest history requires acknowledging uncomfortable truth. Reichenau was not aberration, but exemplar. The international dimension of Wehrmacht memory includes tensions between German efforts at historical reckoning and Eastern European nations' memories of Wehrmacht occupation. For Poland, Ukraine, Belarus, Russia, and other nations that experienced Wehrmacht occupation, there is no ambiguity about Wehrmacht criminality. These nations experienced Wehrmacht atrocities directly and preserve memory of them in memorials, museums, and education. When German veterans organizations or historians attempted to rehabilitate Wehrmacht reputation, Eastern European nations responded with outrage, publishing documentation of Wehrmacht crimes in their territories and demanding acknowledgement. These international tensions complicate German memory politics because German efforts to honour Wehrmacht veterans are interpreted by Eastern Europeans as minimising or denying crimes that these nations remember vividly. Reichenau's operations in Poland, Ukraine, and Russia left legacy of mass murder that these nations will not forget. The sites where his army operated, cities like Kiev, where Babi Yar massacre occurred with Wehrmacht support, maintain memorials documenting Wehrmacht complicity. The current state of historical consensus about Reichenau and Wehrmacht criminality is clear. Scholarly historians, both German and international, agree that Wehrmacht systematically participated in Nazi crimes, that this participation was voluntary rather than forced, and that Wehrmacht leaders like Reichenau bear personal criminal responsibility. This consensus is reflected in academic publications, in museum exhibitions, in educational curricula, and in official government statements. Dissent from this consensus exists primarily among far-right political groups, neo-Nazis, and some Wehrmacht veterans, or their families who refuse to acknowledge their own or their relatives' complicity. This dissent is not based on historical evidence but on ideological commitment to defending German honour or on personal inability to accept difficult truths. Reichenau can no longer be defended as simply talented general serving his nation. He is recognised as war criminal whose military competence made him more dangerous. The memory wars over Wehrmacht guilt are largely settled among serious historians. What remains is ensuring this historical truth reaches broader public consciousness and is preserved for future generations. The lessons of these memory wars extend beyond German history. Societies that experience traumatic histories involving mass atrocities face choice between honest confrontation with past crimes and comfortable myths that avoid difficult truths. Germany's struggle with Wehrmacht memory demonstrates both the difficulty and the necessity of honest historical reckoning. For decades, Germans chose comfortable myth over difficult truth. This choice was understandable given post-war circumstances, but it was wrong. It denied justice to victims, it allowed perpetrators to escape accountability, and it prevented Germans from learning lessons their history teaches. The gradual shift toward honest acknowledgement of Wehrmacht criminality represents moral progress, though incomplete. Reichenau's story is part of this larger story about memory, justice, and historical truth. The aristocrat who chose the swastika died believing he was hero. Decades of historical work have established that he was criminal. The memory wars ensured that truth eventually prevailed, even if justice never did. January 17, 1942, Leipzig. As Walther von Reichenau draws his last breath, unconscious from stroke and crash injuries, he dies believing he has served Germany well. He has led armies to great victories. He has faithfully implemented National Socialist ideology. He has shown harsh determination in dealing with Germany's enemies. By his own standards, and those of the Nazi regime he served, he is a success. He does not know that within 3 years Germany will be destroyed, that the Wehrmacht he helped build will be shattered, that the ideology he embraced will be universally condemned, that the wars he helped start will kill over 60 million people, that history will judge him not as hero but as war criminal. He dies in the delusion of the true believer, convinced that his cause is just and his actions honourable. History's judgment is final. He was catastrophically wrong about everything that mattered. Understanding how intelligent, educated, militarily competent man could be so wrong and could use his competence to serve such evil remains essential for preventing future catastrophes. Reichenau's story teaches that ideological conviction, when combined with military competence and institutional authority, becomes extraordinarily dangerous. A mediocre officer who believes in genocidal ideology is less dangerous than a brilliant officer with same beliefs because the mediocre officer lacks capacity to implement ideology effectively. Reichenau was brilliant, tactically skilled, operationally competent, administratively capable, and personally courageous. These professional virtues made him a valuable military leader in conventional terms. But these same virtues made him a devastatingly effective instrument of genocide when placed in service of Nazi ideology. He could plan operations, coordinate logistics, command troops, and implement policies with efficiency that lesser officers could not match. When these capabilities were directed toward criminal goals, the result was mass death on unprecedented scale. The lesson is that professional competence is not morally neutral. Competence in service of evil amplifies evil. It does not mitigate it. Modern military ethics education emphasizes this lesson. Soldiers and officers have responsibility to ensure their professional skills serve moral purposes, not merely effective purposes. The question of how Reichenau became a Nazi true believer illuminates the broader question of how educated people embrace extremist ideology. Reichenau was not ignorant peasant susceptible to crude propaganda. He was Prussian aristocrat, military academy graduate, cultured man who spoke multiple languages and understood history. Yet he embraced National Socialism completely, believing in racial hierarchy, in Germany's right to conquer living space through war, in necessity of eliminating Jews. Several factors in his background appear relevant. He experienced Germany's defeat in World War I and refused to accept that defeat was military. He embraced stab-in-the-back legend, blaming Germany's internal enemies. He served during Weimar Republic's political chaos and economic crises, making him receptive to authoritarian solutions. He came from military culture that emphasized hierarchy, discipline, and national power, making him vulnerable to ideology that promised national revival through military strength. His personal ambition led him toward Nazi movement that offered rapid advancement to officers who embraced its ideology. None of these factors made his Nazi conviction inevitable, but they created vulnerability that Hitler exploited. The lesson is that education and culture do not immunize people against extremist ideology. Critical moral thinking and firm ethical commitments are necessary. Reichenau's career demonstrates the institutional mechanisms through which military organizations can be corrupted by totalitarian regimes. The Wehrmacht did not become instrument of genocide immediately upon Hitler's rise to power. The process was gradual, occurring through series of steps. Ideologically reliable officers, like Reichenau, were promoted to key positions. Personnel evaluation criteria began, including ideological commitment alongside military competence. Orders were issued that incrementally escalated from questionable to clearly criminal. Officers who protested were sidelined, while those who complied were rewarded. Institutional culture shifted to normalize participation in atrocities. By the time Wehrmacht invaded Soviet Union in 1941, the transformation was complete. Reichenau's role in this process was central. He was bridge between Nazi ideology and military professionalism, demonstrating that professional soldiers could and should embrace Nazi goals. Modern military institutions, particularly in democracies, study Wehrmacht's corruption as cautionary tale. The lesson is that military professionalism requires maintaining ethical standards independent of political pressure, and that officers must be willing to resist orders and policies that violate fundamental moral principles, even at cost to careers. The responsibility of individual officers within hierarchical military structure is another crucial lesson from Reichenau's case. Military organizations require obedience to orders. Discipline and chain of command are essential to effectiveness, but military law and ethics also require disobedience to manifestly illegal orders. The challenge is determining when orders cross from legitimate to criminal and whether individual officers can refuse without being punished. Reichenau's case demonstrates that officers had more moral agency than post-war apologetics claimed. He was not forced to issue his Severity Order, he chose to issue it. Other commanders chose differently, demonstrating that alternatives existed. Some officers protested and survived with only career damage, not execution. The myth that Wehrmacht officers had no choice but to obey criminal orders is refuted by historical evidence. Modern military law codifies the principle established at Nuremberg. Soldiers must refuse orders to commit war crimes, and following orders is not defense against criminal prosecution. This principle makes individual moral judgment necessary even within hierarchical structures. The lesson is that individuals remain morally responsible for their actions, regardless of circumstances or orders. The question of national responsibility for aggressive war and genocide committed by nations' military is complicated, but cannot be evaded. Reichenau did not act alone. He commanded armies of hundreds of thousands of German soldiers who implemented his orders. Behind him stood German government that appointed him, German industry that armed his forces, and significant portion of German population that supported war and at least tolerated, if not supported, persecution of Jews and other victims. Post-war Germany has struggled with questions of collective guilt versus individual responsibility. The current scholarly and legal consensus is that while not all Germans were equally guilty, German society as whole bears responsibility for Nazi crimes because those crimes were committed by German institutions with broad German participation or acquiescence. This does not mean every German was war criminal, but it means German society must acknowledge what was done in Germany's name and must take responsibility for ensuring such crimes never recur. Reichenau represents the criminal leadership, but his crimes required thousands of willing executioners and millions of passive bystanders. The lesson is that preventing genocide requires not just punishing leaders, but creating societies that will not follow leaders like Reichenau. The comparative question of whether other militaries in World War II committed crimes similar to Wehrmacht's, and what this comparison means for judgment of Reichenau and Wehrmacht requires careful analysis. Soviet forces committed serious war crimes, particularly during their advance into Germany in 1944 and 45. Mass rape, looting, execution of prisoners, and harsh treatment of civilians. Western Allied forces committed some war crimes, particularly bombing campaigns against civilian targets that killed hundreds of thousands. Japanese forces in Asia committed atrocities matching or exceeding Wehrmacht's in scale and brutality. Does this mean Wehrmacht crimes were simply normal wartime behaviour? No. All war crimes are wrong, regardless of who commits them, but there are differences of degree and character. Wehrmacht participated in systematic genocide, the attempted elimination of entire peoples based on racial ideology, which is qualitatively different from war crimes committed in heat of battle or as revenge for enemy actions. Wehrmacht crimes were policy implemented through official orders like Reichenau's, not aberrations by individual units or soldiers. Wehrmacht had years to stop its criminal conduct, but instead escalated. The lesson is not that Wehrmacht was uniquely evil, though Nazi Germany's crimes were unprecedented in scale, but that militaries of all nations must guard against tendencies toward brutality and must maintain ethical constraints even under pressure of war. The relevance of Reichenau's story to contemporary military ethics and civil-military relations extends beyond historical interest. Modern military officers, particularly in democracies, face questions about when and whether to implement policies they consider unwise or immoral. They must balance military discipline and civilian control with individual moral responsibility and professional ethics. They must determine how to serve nation while refusing to serve policies that violate fundamental principles. Reichenau represents negative model, officer who abandoned professional ethics in favour of ideological fanaticism whose competence served evil ends. Modern military education uses his case to teach officers about dangers of unquestioning obedience, about necessity of maintaining moral judgment even under orders, and about responsibility to refuse participation in war crimes or crimes against humanity. German military in particular uses Wehrmacht's criminal history as foundation for modern military ethics, emphasizing that soldiers' highest duty is to human dignity and international law, not to state authority or political leaders. This represents fundamental reversal of Reichenau's belief that ideology and obedience to Hitler superseded traditional military ethics. The Holocaust survivors and descendants of Wehrmacht's victims deserve final consideration in any assessment of Reichenau's legacy. For them, Reichenau is not abstract historical figure, but perpetrator who participated in murdering their families. The Jews murdered at Babi Yar, while Reichenau's army provided security. The Soviet prisoners starved to death under policies he ordered. The Polish civilians killed with Wehrmacht cooperation he facilitated. They had families who grieved them and communities that were destroyed. These victims never received justice because Reichenau died before facing trial. Their descendants live with knowledge that criminal who helped murder their families was mourned as hero by Nazi Germany and, for decades after, had his military reputation defended by Wehrmacht apologists. The gradual historical acknowledgement of Wehrmacht criminality and Reichenau's central role provides some measure of vindication, though it cannot resurrect the dead or undo the suffering. The lesson is that historical truth matters morally, not just academically. Establishing truth about Reichenau's crimes honours his victims and their descendants by acknowledging what was done to them and who was responsible. The final assessment of Walther von Reichenau cannot be separated from assessment of his choices. He was born into privilege and tradition. He received excellent education and military training. He had career opportunities that most people never receive. He possessed intelligence, courage, and professional competence. He could have used these advantages to serve genuine human goods, protecting his nation through legitimate defense, maintaining professional military ethics, even under political pressure, or resisting Nazi criminality. Instead, he chose to abandon Prussian military tradition in favor of Nazi ideology. He chose to issue criminal orders that no one forced him to issue. He chose to facilitate genocide rather than obstruct it. He chose to use his military competence to serve evil rather than good. These were choices, not inevitable consequences of circumstances. Other officers in similar situations made different choices, proving that alternatives existed. Reichenau's guilt is his own, resulting from his decisions and his character. He was not tragic figure, caught in forces beyond his control. He was willing participant in great crime, motivated by ideological conviction he embraced voluntarily. The aristocrat who chose the swastika stands finally in history's judgment as war criminal whose military competence made him not less culpable but more dangerous. His legacy includes armies led to victory and to war crimes, orders issued that facilitated genocide, policies implemented that starved hundreds of thousands, an example established that other Wehrmacht commanders followed toward greater criminality, and a historical cautionary tale about how professional military competence divorced from moral constraint produces catastrophe. He died believing he was hero. History knows he was criminal. The lesson his life teaches is eternal. Competence without conscience is monstrous. Ideology can transform professionals into murderers, and military institutions must guard against serving evil, regardless of orders' legality or leaders' authority. Walther von Reichenau's story is tragedy, not because talented man was destroyed by circumstances, but because talented man chose to serve genocide. And that choice, multiplied through millions of similar choices by Germans at all levels of society and military, produced the greatest crime in human history. May his memory serve as warning that such choices must never be made again.